"My lady, you are with child." For a long moment after the physician left her chamber, Lady Eleanor Hartwell did not move. The words remained behind him. They seemed to hang in the air, trembling somewhere between the candle flames and the pale silk curtains drawn across the windows of Ashbourne Hall. With child, Eleanor sat very still in the armchair beside the hearth, one hand resting upon the carved wooden arm, the other slowly moving to her stomach. Not quickly, not dramatically, slowly, as if she feared that any sudden motion might frighten the miracle away. Outside her chamber, Ashbourne Hall continued as it always did. Footmen crossed corridors with polished trays, maids whispered near linen cupboards. Somewhere below, a clock struck the hour with the cold patience of a house that had seen too much pride and too little tenderness. But inside Lady Eleanor's room, the world had changed. She was with child. For 3 years those words had been denied her. For 3 years she had endured the careful pity of titled women who smiled too gently and looked too often toward her empty nursery. The Viscountess is still without child. Poor Lord Ashbourne. A great family line cannot end in an empty cradle. No one had ever said such things loudly enough for Eleanor to accuse them. That was the cruelty of society. It knew how to wound without ever raising its voice. At dinners, ladies lowered their eyes whenever infants were mentioned. At assemblies, mothers spoke of sons and daughters with just enough sweetness to make Eleanor feel the absence beside her like a living thing. Even servants, loyal as many of them were, had begun stepping more softly near the nursery wing, as though silence itself might cover the shame. And then there had been Lady Emmeline Harrington, beautiful Emmeline, polished Emmeline, smiling Emmeline, with golden hair arranged like an offering and blue eyes that never seemed to blink when they looked at Eleanor. She never openly insulted the Viscountess. That would have been vulgar. Instead, she stood near Lord Benedict Ashbourne at dinners and spoke of duty, of legacy, of noble bloodlines, of the difficult burden placed upon men whose titles stretched back through generations, and always, always, she said these things as though Eleanor were not sitting across the table hearing every word. Once, at a spring supper, Emmeline had laid one gloved hand upon the edge of her wine-glass and said with a sorrowful little sigh, "Some houses are not merely homes, are they? They are inheritances. A wife must understand what she owes to such a name." The table had gone quiet. Eleanor had smiled, Benedict had not. That night, after the guests had gone, he had found Eleanor in the portrait gallery, standing beneath the stern faces of Ashbourne ancestors. He had taken her cold hand in his and said nothing for a while. Then, with a gentleness that did not match the severity of his face, he had said, "You owe my name nothing that costs you your peace." Eleanor had turned away before he could see her eyes fill. That was Benedict. To London, Viscount Ashbourne was a powerful man. He was admired in Parliament, where his voice could quiet an argument before it became foolish. He was respected by titled families who understood influence, wealth, and restraint. Men who owed him money feared his patience more than another man's rage. Men who needed his vote measured their words before speaking in his presence. He was not known for warmth, he was not known for softness. But with Eleanor in the private rooms of Ashbourne Hall, he noticed everything. He remembered that she preferred a tea with a thin slice of lemon, never cream. He knew when music troubled her and when silence comforted her. He noticed when she was tired before she admitted it. He kissed her gloved hand before leaving a room, even if no one stood there to witness it. And now she would tell him. Eleanor's breath caught. She pressed her fingers more firmly to her stomach. Benedict Ashbourne, the proudest man in London, was going to be a father. She imagined his face when the words reached him. First disbelief, then shock, then that rare, sudden softening around his eyes that belonged only to her. Perhaps his hand would tremble. Perhaps he would turn away for a moment, not because he was cold, but because his heart had moved faster than his pride could follow. Perhaps he would kneel before her, place his palm against her stomach, and forget every watching ancestor in every painted frame. For the first time in months, Eleanor laughed. It was a small sound, fragile, almost frightened of itself, but it was laughter. She rose from the chair too quickly, then steadied herself with one hand against the mantel. The physician had warned her against agitation. But how could a woman be still when hope had just been returned to her? She crossed to the looking-glass. A pale woman stared back. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne was 25. Though grief and gossip had tried to make her older, her dark hair had been pinned simply for the evening, with a few loose curls at her temples. Her gown was soft ivory muslin, elegant but not extravagant, the sleeves delicate, the bodice modestly embroidered. A woman dressed for quietness, but her eyes were alive. She placed both hands over her stomach and whispered, "You are loved." The words trembled out of her. "You are already so loved." Then she turned, gathered her skirts, and went to find her husband. The corridors of Ashbourne Hall were lit by candles set into gilded sconces. Their flames bent and flickered as Eleanor passed, casting long shadows across the crimson runner beneath her feet. The house seemed enormous at night, its carved doors and dark portraits watching her with all the solemn authority of the Ashbourne name. But Eleanor was not afraid of the house tonight. Tonight, She moved through it as a woman carrying dawn inside her. Her heart reached Benedict's chamber before she did. She imagined knocking. She imagined him looking up from some letters or estate paper. Surprised by the brightness in her face, she imagined herself failing to speak at first, then laughing through tears. She imagined his arms around her. She had almost reached the turn toward his private chamber when she stopped. At first, she thought it was a servant. Then she heard the woman's voice. Soft, Emmeline Harrington. Eleanor stood very still. The corridor seemed to narrow around her. She looked toward Benedict's chamber door. It was not fully closed. A thin line of candlelight escaped through the opening and spilled across the floor. Eleanor should have turned away. She knew that. A lady did not listen at doors. A wife did not creep toward her husband's private room like a servant hunting scandal. But the hour was late. The house had retired, and Emmeline Harrington's voice had no reason to be there. Eleanor took one step closer, then another. Her fingers tightened in the folds of her skirt. Inside the room, Emmeline spoke again. "Surely you know it cannot continue as it is." There was a pause. Then a man's voice answered, low, familiar enough to strike the breath from Eleanor's chest. Close enough to Benedict's voice that her body recognized it before her mind could refuse. Eleanor reached the door. Through the narrow opening, she saw only part of the chamber, a candle burning low upon a table, a painted screen near the far side of the room. A dark dressing robe draped over a man's form half hidden by shadow. Benedict's. Eleanor knew it. She had seen him wear it on cold mornings when he read by the fire. Then she saw a hand, only a hand, resting near the edge of the screen. Upon one finger was the Ashbourne signet ring, her husband's ring. The floor beneath her seemed to disappear. Emmeline's gown whispered as she moved. Eleanor could see the pale blue edge of it near the candlelight. Then came the sentence that ended one life and began another. A viscount cannot build his future on a barren wife. The words did not sound shouted. That made them worse. They were spoken calmly, like law, like fact, like a truth everyone had known except Eleanor. She placed one hand against the wall to keep herself upright. Inside the chamber, "Duty is not cruelty, my lord. It is only duty. Ashbourne must have what she cannot give." The man behind the screen did not step forward. He did not deny her. He did not say Eleanor's name with outrage. He did not defend his wife. Eleanor's hand moved to her stomach. No, not their child now. Hers. A strange, terrible clarity settled over her. She did not push the door open. She did not storm into the room. She did not demand an explanation before witnesses could be summoned and dignity. Torn into ribbons, some women might have screamed. Some might have struck Emmeline across the face. Some might have thrown the truth like a burning lamp into the room. "I'm with child." "You are too late." But Eleanor did none of those things. Because in that moment, heartbreak became fear. Not fear for herself. Fear for the life beneath her hand. If Benedict had already chosen Emmeline, then what would happen when he discovered Eleanor carried his heir? Would he rejoice, or would he take the child? Would the baby be raised under Ashbourne's roof while Eleanor was slowly erased from the nursery? Would Emmeline stand beside the cradle, smiling with that perfect sweetness while society congratulated her for her patience and Benedict for his duty? Eleanor saw it too clearly. Her child in another woman's arms, her miracle turned into Emmeline Harrington's victory. She stepped back from the door, then back again. The voices continued, but she could no longer hear the words. The blood was roaring too loudly in her ears. She turned and walked away. Not quickly at first. A lady did not run through corridors at Ashbourne Hall, even when her heart had just been split open. Even when the man she loved had become a stranger behind a painted screen. But once she reached the darker passage near the east stair, her composure broke. A sound escaped her throat, small, sharp, almost not human. Then she covered her mouth with her fist and forced herself onward. By the time Eleanor reached her chamber, she was no longer crying. That frightened her more than tears would have done. She closed the door behind her and stood in the middle of the room. The fire had burned lower. The candles had shortened. Her reflection in the looking-glass looked like a woman who had walked out of one world and entered another without warning. She placed both hands over her stomach. "You are mine," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. "You are mine before you are anyone's heir." For several minutes, she remained there, breathing through the pain until it became something colder. Then she crossed to her writing desk. Her hands were steady when she took out the paper. That was how she knew something inside her had changed forever. She dipped the pen into ink. For a moment she stared at the blank page. How could so little paper hold so much ruin? Then she began. "My lord," she stopped. "Not Benedict. Not my love, my lord." The correct distance between a wife and the man who had shattered her, she continued. "I have been unhappy for some time. This marriage no longer suits either of us. You need an heir, and I cannot give you one. I am leaving. Do not follow me, Eleanor." She read it once. Only once. It was not the truth, but it was the truth he deserved to believe. Or perhaps the truth she needed him to believe. If he thought she left because of shame, he might let her go. If he thought she could not give him an heir, he would not search for the child. If he thought her barren, her baby might remain safe. Eleanor folded the letter carefully. Then she sealed it. No tears fell upon the paper. She would not give him even that. Afterward, she moved through the room with quiet purpose, a small traveling case, a dark cloak, a little money from the drawer, a miniature portrait of her mother. Nothing that would slow her, nothing that would make anyone suspect before dawn. She did not take jewels. Jewels could be traced. She did not take gowns. Gowns could be recognized. She took only what a woman needed when she had no choice but to disappear. At the door she paused. Ashbourne Hall was silent now. Somewhere within its walls, the man she had loved was either sleeping peacefully after betraying her, or awake in his chamber with Emmeline Harrington beside him. Eleanor closed her eyes for one dangerous moment. She remembered Benedict as he had been. Benedict brushing a raindrop from her cheek beneath the garden arch. Benedict placing a shawl around her shoulders without being asked. Benedict whispering after a cruel dinner full of pitying looks, "Let them talk. I know the worth of my wife." Her lips trembled. Then she opened her eyes. Whatever he had once been, tonight he had let another woman speak of replacing her. Tonight he had remained silent, and silence was sometimes the sharpest confession. Eleanor pulled up the hood of her cloak. She left the letter where he would find it. Then Lady Eleanor Hartwell, Viscountess Ashbourne, stepped out of her chamber and into the last night of her old life. No one saw her take the servants' passage. No one saw her cross the rear hall, where the stone floor held the cold of the earth beneath it. No one saw her pause near the nursery wing. The door stood closed. The room beyond had been prepared years ago with foolish hope. A carved cradle, a painted screen, a little shelf for storybooks. Eleanor stood before that closed door and pressed a hand to her mouth. One day, she thought, one day my child will sleep somewhere safe, not here. Not beneath Emmeline Harrington's smile, not beneath a father's divided loyalty. Somewhere safe, she moved on. At the back entrance, an old maid named Agnes waited in the shadows. She had served Eleanor since girlhood and asked no questions that night. Perhaps she knew better. Perhaps she saw enough in Eleanor's face to understand that some women did not flee because they were weak. Some fled because remaining would destroy what they most needed to protect. "The cart is beyond the orchard, my lady," Agnes whispered. "No one will look there before morning." Eleanor took the maid's hands. For a moment they simply looked at one another. Then Eleanor said, "If anyone asks, you knew nothing." Agnes's eyes shone. "I know," Eleanor nodded once. Then she walked into the cold. The night air struck her like water. Above Ashbourne Hall, the sky was black and starless. The great house rose behind her, all stone and shadow, its windows dark except for a few burning points of candlelight. It looked less like a home than a judgment. Eleanor crossed the frozen grass. Her slippers were not made for such ground. The hem of her gown darkened with damp. The wind pulled at her cloak, but she kept one hand fixed over her stomach as though shielding the life inside her from the entire world. At the edge of the orchard, she turned back once. Only Ashbourne Hall stood silent. Behind one of those walls was Benedict Ashbourne, her husband, the father of her child. The man she would have forgiven for pride, for coldness, for distance, for anything except replacing her before she had even told him she had given him hope. Eleanor's face twisted, but still no tears came. Those would come later, when survival no longer required every part of her strength. She climbed into the waiting cart. The driver flicked the reins. The wheels began to turn. Faster, Ashbourne Hall receded behind her, swallowed by darkness and trees. Before dawn, Lady Eleanor Hartwell vanished from the house where she had once believed love could protect her. Inside her, Benedict Ashbourne's heir had begun to grow 2 heirs, though she would not discover that until much later, and behind another locked door, hidden from every truth that mattered, Viscount Benedict Ashbourne lay unconscious in a narrow inner chamber, his skin pale, his breathing heavy from the drug poured into his wine. He did not know his robe had been stolen. He did not know his signet ring had been taken from his hand. He did not know another man had spoken from behind a painted screen in a voice meant to sound like his. He did not know Lady Emmeline Harrington had stood in his chamber and helped murder his wife's trust without spilling a drop of blood. He did not know Eleanor had come to him with the happiest news of their marriage. He did not know she had left with the future beneath her heart. And he did not know that when morning came, he would wake to a letter that would destroy him. 7 years would pass before he understood that the night his wife vanished was not the night she abandoned him. It was the night someone stole them both, his wife, his children, and every tomorrow they should have had. But by then, the silence would have grown teeth, and the children born from that silence would no longer be infants hidden beneath their mother's cloak. They would have his eyes, his blood, his name, and one day in a glittering ballroom full of people who believed Lady Eleanor Ashbourne was dead, Viscount Benedict Ashbourne would turn and see the woman he had mourned standing alive before him with his twin heirs at her side. But that reckoning began here, in a candlelit chamber, with a physician's whisper, a forged betrayal, and one mother's decision to disappear before the world could take her child from her. 7 years later, the world believed Lady Eleanor Ashbourne was dead. Not missing, not hidden, not wounded somewhere society's reach. Dead. That was the version London preferred. A vanished wife was uncomfortable. A dead one was convenient. A vanished viscountess left too many questions wandering through drawing rooms. Why had she gone? Who had helped her? What shame had driven her from one of the grandest houses in England before dawn? Had Viscount Ashbourne been cruel? Had Lady Eleanor been faithless? Had there been a child? Had there been a scandal so ugly that even the servants had been paid to forget it? But a dead woman? A dead woman could be pitied, discussed, and then dismissed. Society liked its scandals neat. It liked them folded properly, sealed with black wax, and placed in the past where they could no longer demand justice. So when Lord Ivor Harrington produced evidence that Lady Eleanor Ashbourne had died abroad after fleeing England, the Ton accepted it with eager sorrow. There had been a letter, a name entered in a foreign registry, a witness willing to speak just enough and no more. It was all very tragic. It was also very useful, and within months, London stopped asking where Eleanor had gone. Within a year, they spoke of her in the tender voice reserved for women who could no longer correct the story. Poor lady, a sad end. Such a foolish escape, such a pity Lord Ashbourne had suffered so greatly. They did not know that the dead woman rose every morning before her children woke. They did not know she lived quietly beneath her maiden name, under the protection of her sister, Lady Louisa Hartwell, in a country house far from London's glassy eyes and sharpened tongues. They did not know that Lady Eleanor Ashbourne was alive, and they certainly did not know she was a mother. The house in which Eleanor lived was not grand enough to impress anyone from Mayfair. It was not built to intimidate guests. It had no marble hall, no ancestral gallery, no sweeping staircase designed to make women appear like visions as they descended. It was a gentler place. Hartwell Cottage stood at the edge of a quiet village, surrounded by hawthorn hedges, old stone walls, and fields that turned gold in late summer. In winter, smoke curled from its chimneys and the windows glowed warmly against the frost. In spring, wildflowers crowded the garden paths as if they had never learned restraint. It was not Ashbourne Hall. That was why Eleanor had chosen it here. No portrait watched her from the walls. No servant whispered the old title behind her back. No one looked at an empty nursery with pity. Because the nursery was not empty, at the far end of the upstairs corridor, behind a pale blue door, lived Master Edmund Hartwell and Miss Clara Hartwell. That was what the village knew them as, the orphaned children of a distant relation. The beloved niece and nephew of Lady Louisa, the quiet boy and the bold girl who walked to church each Sunday with their mother between them. But in Eleanor's heart, where truth had never died, she knew what they truly were. Ashbourne. Clara Ashbourne. The son and daughter of Viscount Benedict Ashbourne, the heirs he had never known existed. They were 7 years old now. Born within minutes of each other on a storm-dark morning when Eleanor thought pain would split the world open. Louisa had held her hand through the long hours. Lord Frederick Montclair had ridden through flooded roads to fetch the physician. And when the babies finally came, one after the other, Eleanor had wept so hard she could hardly see their faces. A boy, then a girl. 2 lives hidden beneath one secret. Edmund had been born first, small, solemn, and silent, as if he had entered the world already listening. Even as a baby, he had watched everything. As a child, he did the same. He had Benedict's eyes. That was the first cruelty and the first blessing. Dark, thoughtful eyes that held more feeling than they revealed. Eyes that seemed to study a room before trusting it. Eyes that made Eleanor's breath catch when he looked up from a book or turned his face toward a window in deep concentration. He had Benedict's stillness, too. Not coldness. Stillness, the careful quiet of someone who felt deeply but had already learned the danger of showing too much. When adults spoke in lowered tones, Edmund listened. When Eleanor grew silent at the mention of London, Edmund noticed. When Clara asked questions that made their mother turn pale, Edmund would reach for his sister's sleeve and whisper, "Not now." He was too careful for a child, too considerate, too skilled at protecting his mother from his own curiosity, and that, perhaps, hurt Eleanor most. Because Edmund wanted to ask about his father, she knew it. She saw the question in his eyes whenever they passed a father lifting a child onto a horse, or a gentleman walking with his son after church, or a little girl running ahead to tug at her papa's coat. Edmund rarely asked. Not because he did not wonder, but because he knew questions made his mother's face change. Clara was different. Clara was fire. She had been born second and had been making herself heard ever since. She was bright, restless, bold, and fiercely loyal in the unreasonable way only children could be. Her dark curls refused neatness. Her eyes flashed when she was displeased. Her chin lifted when anyone tried to soften the truth for her. The Ashbourne chin, Louisa had once murmured by accident. Eleanor had dropped a teacup. After that, Louisa never said it again. But Clara always heard. She heard doors close too gently. She heard pauses before answers. She heard the names adults did not say. Unlike Edmund, Clara did not tiptoe around pain. She walked straight toward it and demanded it introduce itself. When she was 5, she asked, "Mama, why have we no father?" Eleanor had been mending a small tear in Edmund's sleeve by the window. Her needle stopped in the cloth. Louisa, seated nearby with a book, went very still. Edmund looked down at his hands. Eleanor forced herself to breathe. "Every family is shaped differently, my darling," Clara frowned. "That is not an answer." "No," Eleanor said softly. "It is not." The room seemed to dim. Eleanor looked at her daughter. Clara's face held no cruelty. A child's hunger for the missing piece of her own story. "To us," Eleanor said at last, "he had to be." Clara did not speak for a long while after that, but the sentence entered her and settled there. To us, he had to be. From that day forward, Clara built a father from shadows. In her mind, he was not a man, he was a wound. A person powerful enough to make her mother look away from certain questions. A person absent enough to deserve suspicion. A person whose name could silence a room. Edmund wanted a father and hated himself for wanting. Clara wanted someone to blame. And between them stood Eleanor, loving them with everything she had, while guarding the door to a past that refused to stay buried. She never spoke Benedict's name. She never cursed him. She never told the twins he had abandoned them. But children are cleverer than grief believes. They learn from the things a mother does not say. They learn from the way her hand tightens around a letter. They learn from the way her eyes move toward the window when carriage wheels sound in the distance. They learn that silence has shape, and the silence around their father had become the largest thing in the house. Still, Eleanor tried to give them joy. She taught Edmund to read from old storybooks by the fire. She let Clara climb low branches in the orchard, though Louisa protested every time. She embroidered their initials onto handkerchiefs and baked little honey cakes for birthdays. She kissed fevered foreheads, settled quarrels, praised courage, corrected pride, and stood between them and the world with the steady devotion of a mother who had already lost too much. To the village she was Mrs. Hartwell, a widow perhaps, or nearly so. No one knew the details, and in villages, when a woman was kind and paid her bills, sometimes people were merciful enough not to ask, but London was not merciful. London had never been merciful, and London had not forgotten Viscount Benedict Ashbourne to the ton. Benedict had survived tragedy with admirable strength. That was what they said. He had returned to Parliament. He had reopened Ashbourne Hall after years of mourning. He hosted dinners again, though the candles seemed less warm than they once had. He attended assemblies, though he rarely danced. He took his place among titled men, heard petitions, advised ministers, and spoke with such controlled authority that younger lords often fell silent when he entered a room. He had moved on. That was what society believed. The phrase followed him everywhere. Lord Ashbourne has moved on at last. A man cannot mourn forever. The poor Viscount deserves peace now. After 7 years, London had its proof. Viscount Benedict Ashbourne was engaged to Lady Emmeline Harrington. The same Emmeline who had once stood too near him at dinner, the same Emmeline whose sweetness had never reached her eyes. The same Emmeline whose family had suffered quiet financial ruin while maintaining loud social pride. The announcement pleased everyone. A tragic widower, a patient lady, a respected alliance, a grand house restored. No one asked whether Benedict's heart had agreed. They only saw what he allowed them to see. A man in a dark coat standing beside a beautiful woman, a ring offered, a date chosen, a future resumed. But inside Ashbourne Hall, where servants still moved softly through corridors, there remained a locked room, not truly locked by key, locked by grief. Benedict's private study had changed little in 7 years. The same mahogany desk stood before the tall windows. The same shelves held leather-bound volumes. The same decanter sat near the hearth, though he drank from it less than people assumed. Above the mantel hung a portrait covered in black silk. He had ordered it covered after the false report of her death reached him. Not because he hated looking at her, because he could not bear being looked at by her. In the lower drawer of his desk lay letters, dozens of them, written and never sent. Some were furious, some were pleading, some were no more than a few unfinished lines. "Eleanor, why did you go, Eleanor? Did I fail you so completely, Eleanor? If you are alive, send me one word and I shall come later." After Lord Ivor Harrington produced the evidence of her death abroad, the letters changed. "They tell me you are gone, Eleanor." I believed anger would protect me. It did not, Eleanor. I hope he was kind to you. He, Lord Frederick Montclair. That name had been the knife turned slowly in Benedict's wound. Ivor had given him letters forged, though Benedict had not known it. Carefully written correspondence suggesting Eleanor had confided in Frederick before her disappearance, hints of meetings, hints of affection, hints that she had fled not into fear but into another man's protection. Benedict had believed it because grief needed a shape, because the letter Eleanor left behind had said she was unhappy, because shame made it easier to believe he had been replaced than to imagine she had vanished for no reason. And then, when he was told she had died abroad, the wound hardened into something he could carry. He had mourned a wife he believed had chosen another man. He had buried love beneath dignity. And when Emmeline Harrington stood beside him years later, offering patience, loyalty, and a path back into society's approval, Benedict accepted the engagement not with joy but with exhaustion. Some men moved on because they were healed. Benedict Ashbourne moved on because the world kept insisting the dead could not return. But the dead woman was alive, and one morning, at Hartwell Cottage, the past found her. It came on a silver tray. Louisa entered the breakfast room holding an envelope. Her face pale in a way Eleanor had not seen in years. The twins were at the table. Edmund was reading quietly beside a plate of toast. Clara was attempting to feed crumbs to a bird through the open window, despite having been told twice not to encourage wildlife into the breakfast room. Eleanor looked up at her sister. "What is it?" Louisa did not answer at once. Eleanor rose. "Louisa." Her sister crossed the room and placed the envelope into her hand. The paper was thick, expensive. The seal bore the Ashbourne crest. For a moment, Eleanor did not understand how her body continued standing. She stared at the seal as though it were a living thing. Edmund looked up. Clara turned from the window. "Mama?" Edmund asked softly. Eleanor forced a smile that convinced no one. "Finish your breakfast." Clara narrowed her eyes. "No one says that unless something is wrong." Louisa stepped in quickly. "Clara, mind your crumbs." "But now." Clara obeyed, but her eyes remained on her mother. Eleanor carried the envelope into the adjoining sitting room. Louisa followed and closed the door behind them. Only then did Eleanor break the seal. The invitation was written in elegant hand. "Viscount Ashbourne requests the honour of your presence at a ball held in celebration of his forthcoming marriage to Lady Emmeline Harrington." For several seconds, Eleanor could not feel her fingers. Then she laughed once, a low, broken sound without amusement. "How cruel," Louisa whispered. Eleanor stared at the words, Emmeline Harrington, forthcoming marriage, Ashbourne Hall. The past had not merely survived. It had dressed itself in silk and invited her to watch it triumph. "I will not go," Eleanor said. The words were immediate. "Heinel." Louisa took the invitation from her trembling hand. "Of course you will not." But later that afternoon a second note arrived. This one had no crest. No signature, no elegance. Only one folded sheet, delivered by a boy who vanished before the servant could question him. Eleanor opened it alone. Children without a lawful name are easily questioned. Come to London or others may decide what they are. The room tilted. She read the words again, then again. The threat did not shout, it did not need to. It had gone straight to one place she could not protect with silence, her children. By evening, Lord Frederick Montclair stood in Louisa's drawing room, his hat in his hand and concern carved plainly across his face. He was older now than he had been the night Eleanor fled Ashbourne Hall, still handsome, though his charm had softened into something steadier. He had never asked for gratitude, which was why Eleanor had always given it freely. Frederick had helped Louisa protect her when no one else could. He had fetched physicians, arranged discreet travel, paid servants to keep silent when Eleanor had nothing but fear and a borrowed name. He had never asked for anything in return, and he had never pretended Eleanor's heart belonged anywhere but the ruins of Ashbourne Hall. Now he read the unsigned note and swore quietly under his breath. Louisa looked toward the closed door, beyond which Edmund and Clara were pretending not to listen. "It is I." Frederick's jaw tightened lightly. Eleanor stood near the fireplace, one hand gripping the mantel. "If I do not go, he may expose them." "If you do go," Louisa replied, "you walk into the hands of people who already destroyed your life once." Eleanor looked at the note again. "My life is not the one being threatened." A silence followed. Then Frederick spoke gently. "Let me escort you." Eleanor looked up. "No. Yes, Frederick, you know what society believed." "I know exactly what Lord Ashbourne was led to believe," Frederick said. The words struck her. Eleanor's face sharpened. "What do you mean?" Frederick hesitated. Then his expression changed, as if he had carried a burden too long and had finally found the edge of it. "There were rumors after you vanished. Ugly ones. Ivor encouraged used." Eleanor went still. "Used how?" "As the man you ran to." Louisa closed her eyes. Eleanor stared at him. "No, Frederick's voice was quiet. "I do not know what Ashbourne believed, but I know what others were invited to believe." Something cold moved through Eleanor's chest. Benedict had believed she left because the marriage no longer suited her. But had he also believed she left with Frederick? Had that been why he never came? Why no Ashbourne carriage ever appeared in the lane? Why no hand reached through the silence to pull her back? The thought should have softened something. Instead, it made the old wound ache in a new direction. Frederick stepped closer, but not too close. "If I escort, society will think what it already thinks. That may work in our favor." Louisa frowned. "How can that possibly help?" "Because it gives them a reason for my presence and an explanation for my protection. It allows me to stand near Eleanor and the children without drawing immediate suspicion to their true father." Eleanor looked toward the door. Beyond it, Clara whispered something sharply. Edmund hushed her. Her children, her beautiful hidden children. They were no longer babies she could carry beneath a cloak. They had faces now, voices, questions. They had Benedict's eyes and Benedict's chin and the Ashbourne blood, sitting plainly in their bones for any careful observer to recognize. London would see it, Benedict would see it, perhaps that was the point of the threat. Eleanor sank slowly into a chair. I've kept them safe for 7 years, as Louisa have, and now safety is ending. No, Louisa said firmly. Secrecy may be ending, that is not the same thing. Eleanor looked at her sister, then at Frederick. The room seemed very quiet. Then the door opened. Clara stood there, Edmund beside her. Neither child looked guilty enough to have truly avoided listening. Clara folded her arms. Are we going to London? Eleanor's heart clenched. Clara, because if someone is threatening us, I should like to know who. Edmund's face was paler than his sister's, but his voice was steady. Is it about our father? No one answered, and that was answer enough. The journey to London took place 3 days later. Eleanor wore deep grey beneath her travelling cloak. Louisa packed more than necessary. Frederick rode beside the carriage for the first hour, then joined them when rain began to fall in fine silver lines across the road. Edmund sat quietly, watching the countryside pass. Clara asked questions until Louisa developed a headache. Will there be dancing? Yes. Will there be cruel people? Almost certainly. May I speak to them? No. What if they speak to Mama first? Still no. Clara considered this. What if they deserve it? Eleanor, despite everything, nearly smiled. Edmund looked at his mother. Will he be there? Eleanor did not pretend not to understand. Yes. Clara's eyes sharpened. The man who had to be dead to us. The carriage fell silent. Eleanor looked at her daughter. He is Viscount Ashbourne. Edmund's fingers tightened over the book in his lap. Clara lifted her chin. Then I shall not like him. Eleanor's voice softened. You do not know him, neither do you any more, Clara replied. The words were too sharp for a child, and too true for comfort. By the time they reached London, evening had begun to gather over the city. Lamps glowed in windows, carriages rolled through damp streets, houses rose in elegant rows, their doors polished, their curtains drawn against curiosity that somehow always found a way inside. Eleanor looked out from behind the carriage curtain. 7 years. 7 years since she had breathed this air, 7 years since she had been Lady Ashbourne in the eyes of the world. Now she returned as a ghost. A scandal. A mother with 2 living proofs that the past was not finished. The night of the engagement ball arrived cold and bright. Ashbourne Hall blazed with light. Every window shone. Carriages crowded the drive. Footmen in livery moved briskly beneath the glow of torches. Music drifted faintly from within, elegant and careless, as though the house itself had forgotten how much sorrow had once passed through its doors. Inside the carriage, Eleanor sat very still. Her gown was deep wine-coloured silk, rich but restrained, with long, modest neckline edged in delicate embroidery. Her dark hair was pinned with pearl combs Louisa had insisted upon, though Eleanor had wanted no ornament. You must not enter looking defeated, Louisa had said, so Eleanor did not. She looked like what society had failed to bury. Frederick sat opposite her, composed but alert. Edmund wore a dark blue coat and stood close to his mother when the carriage door opened. Clara wore ivory muslin with a sash the colour of rose petals. She looked angelic. This was misleading. Eleanor took one breath, then another. Frederick offered his arm. Ready? No, Eleanor said. Then she placed her gloved hand on his. I'm going in. They ascended the steps. At the great doors of Ashbourne Hall, Eleanor paused. The last time she had left this house, she had done so through the back entrance before dawn. One hand over her unborn children. Now she entered through the front with those children beside her. The doors opened. Warmth struck first. Then candlelight, then music, then the full force of hundreds of eyes turning at once. The ballroom of Ashbourne Hall glittered with chandeliers, silk gowns, dark coats, polished jewels, and every important whisper London had to offer. But one by one the whispers died. A lady near the entrance gasped. A gentleman lowered his glass. Someone dropped a fan. Eleanor felt the silence spread across the room in layers. First confusion, then recognition. The dead woman had returned. Frederick's arm remained steady beneath her hand. Edmund pressed closer to her side. Clara looked around the ballroom as if memorizing every face that dared stare too long. And across the glittering room, beside Lady Emmeline Harrington, Viscount Benedict Ashbourne turned. For a heartbeat he did not move. The colour drained from his face so completely that he looked less like a powerful man than a portrait suddenly given pain. His eyes found Eleanor first, the woman he had mourned, the wife he believed gone beyond reach. Then his gaze lowered to the boy standing beside her. Edmund, still watchful, dark-eyed. Benedict's expression changed, not loudly, not visibly enough for every fool in the ballroom to understand. But Eleanor saw it. On the exact moment became recognition. Then he looked at Clara. Her lifted chin, her defiant stare. The shape of Ashbourne pride in a child's small face. Benedict Ashbourne took one step forward, then stopped. Eleanor's hand tightened around Frederick's arm. The music faltered. The room held its breath. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne had entered the engagement ball of the husband who believed her dead. At her side stood the man Benedict had been told she chose, and beside them stood 2 children with Ashbourne written plainly in their bones. The past had not come quietly, it had walked through erring Wine's doors, holding 2 heirs by the hand, and in that glittering, merciless ballroom, every lie buried 7 years ago began to stir. The ballroom went silent in layers, first because Lady Eleanor Ashbourne was alive, then because she had entered Ashbourne Hall on the arm of Lord Frederick Montclair, and then, most dangerously of all, because 2 children stood beside her, children no one had been told to expect, children with dark eyes, lifted chins, and the unsettling stillness of a secret that had finally learned how to breathe. For several moments, no one moved. The music did not stop all at once. It stumbled as if even the musicians did not know whether shock was enough reason to abandon a waltz. A violin faltered, a bow dragged too softly over a string, the pianoforte struck one uncertain note, then another, before silence claimed the room completely. Every candle seemed too bright, every whisper seemed trapped behind closed lips. Every jeweled woman and titled gentleman in that glittering chamber understood in the same terrible instant that they were no longer attending an engagement ball. They were witnessing a resurrection. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, believed dead for years, stood beneath the chandeliers of the house she had vanished from before dawn, not pale as a ghost, not broken as some might have preferred, alive, and beautiful in a way that made pity impossible. Her wine-colored gown moved softly around her like the last light of evening. Pearl combs held her dark hair in place, though one curl had loosened near her temple. Her gloved hand rested upon Frederick Montclair's arm, but her posture belonged to no man. She stood like a woman who had walked through 7 years of silence and returned with every wound hidden beneath. Dignity. Beside her stood a boy, Master Edmund Hartwell, as society would soon be told. He wore a dark blue coat, neatly cut, with polished shoes and a white collar too stiff for comfort. His small hands were folded before him. His face held none of the easy curiosity expected in a child attending his first grand ball. He was watching, listening, measuring. His gaze moved across the room with quiet caution, and those who looked too long felt, without understanding why, that the boy was not merely seeing them. He was learning what they might become. On Eleanor's other side stood Clara, Miss Clara Hartwell. At first glance she seemed almost angelic. Her ivory muslin dress had a rose-colored sash tied at the waist. Her dark curls fell in careful ringlets, though several had already rebelled around her cheeks. Her eyes were bright, her mouth firm, her chin lifted. She looked like a child painted for a family portrait. Then, once I saw the fire, Clara was not frightened by the ballroom. She was offended by it, offended by the silence, offended by the way people looked at her mother as if Eleanor were an object returned from the dead for their entertainment. She took half a step closer to Eleanor, not seeking protection, but offering it. Across the room, Viscount Benedict Ashbourne had not moved. He stood beside Lady Emmeline Harrington beneath a garland of white roses arranged for the celebration of their engagement. His evening coat was black, severe and perfectly tailored. His face, usually so controlled that men twice his age guarded their words in it, presence had lost its color. For 7 years, Benedict Ashbourne had believed his wife was dead. He had carried the knowledge like iron beneath his ribs. He had heard her name spoken in pitying voices. He had covered her portrait in black silk. He had written letters to a woman he believed would never read them. He had built a life out of duty because love had become a grave. And now that grave had opened its eyes. Eleanor, his Eleanor alive, the name moved through him without sound. At first he saw only her. The curve of her face, older now, finer somehow, sharpened by grief but not diminished by it, the calm of her mouth, the guardedness in her eyes. The woman he had lost, standing only a few yards away, close enough for him to see that her hand trembled once upon Frederick Montclair's sleeve. Frederick. The name struck him like a second wound. For 7 years that man had lived in Benedict's mind as a shadow beside Eleanor's disappearance. The gentleman she had been rumored to trust. The man whose name had appeared in whispered correspondence. The man Benedict had believed she might have chosen when she left him. And now Frederick stood where Benedict should have stood, beside her, protecting her, holding the space at her side as if he had earned it through years Benedict had not been allowed to witness. A cold blade of jealousy moved through Benedict before he could master it, then his gaze dropped. To the boy, everything inside him stopped. The ballroom blurred, the chandeliers, the roses, the staring guest's hand tightening faintly upon his sleeve. All of it faded. Only the boy remained, dark eyes, a careful restrained face, far too solemn for his age. Benedict knew that stillness. He had carried it since childhood. He knew the way it looked to feel more than one showed. He knew the way a young face could become composed too early, because the world had taught it to guard itself. The boy looked toward him. Not a likeness one could easily dismiss, not a passing resemblance. Blood, clear as a crest pressed into wax. Benedict's breath caught so sharply that Emmeline glanced at him. "My lord," she whispered. He did not answer. His gaze moved to the girl, Clara. Though he did not yet know her name, the force of her presence reached him at once. Her chin, his mother's chin, the unmistakable Ashbourne pride in miniature. Wrapped in ivory muslin and outrage, she looked at him not with wonder, not with shyness, not with childish confusion. She looked at him as though he had already been judged and found lacking. Benedict took one step forward. The movement broke the room's paralysis. Whispers rose like sparks. Lady cannot be. She was dead. Those children. Montclair is with her. Look at the girl. Does Ashbourne know? Eleanor heard every whisper. She felt each one like a pin driven carefully through silk. But she kept her head high. She had known this would happen. She had prepared for stares, for shock, for suspicion. She had not prepared for Benedict's face. She had imagined anger. She had imagined coldness. She had imagined disgust, even triumph, now that he stood publicly beside Emmeline. But she had not imagined devastation. Benedict looked as though the past had reached into his chest and torn out something still beating. For one dangerous second, Eleanor almost doubted the memory that had governed 7 years of her life. The screen, the robe, the ring, the voice. A viscount cannot build his future on a barren wife. No, she steadied herself. Pain had a way of dressing itself as innocence when caught too late. Frederick felt the slight change in her hand upon his sleeve. Steady, he murmured, too softly for anyone else to hear. Benedict saw his mouth move. His jaw tightened. Of course Montclair would speak to her that way. Of course he would lean near, quietly familiar, protective in a room where Benedict had once believed himself the only man with that right. Emmeline moved then. It was a small step, graceful and controlled, but it placed her nearer to Benedict. "My lord," she said again, louder this time. Her voice sweet enough to reach the first circle of watching guests. "Perhaps Lady Ashbourne is unwell. Such a dramatic entrance must have exhausted her." Eleanor turned her gaze to Emmeline. 7 years had not changed her as much as Eleanor expected. Emmeline Harrington remained beautiful in the polished manner that required effort, while pretending not to. Her fair hair gleamed beneath the chandeliers, her pale gown shimmered like moonlit water, her smile was perfect, too perfect. The sight of her was a hand closing around Eleanor's throat, the same woman, the same sweetness, the same quiet claim. And now she stood beside Benedict as his intended bride. The room waited for someone to say what everyone was thinking. Benedict ignored Emmeline's comment and continued forward. Each step was measured, not because he was calm, because if he moved too quickly, he feared he might break. The guests parted for him. No one wished to stand between a viscount and the dead wife who had returned with 2 children. He stopped before Eleanor, close enough now that she could see the fine lines grief had carved near his mouth. Close enough that he could see the faint mark near her thumb where she had once pricked herself sewing and laughed when he made too much of it. 7 years vanished and remained all at once, he said. Her name sounded different in its voice. Not like accusation, not like welcome. Like prayer and punishment bound together, she curtsied. The movement was small, perfect, and colder than any slap. "My lord." Benedict flinched. Barely, but Eleanor saw it. So did Emmeline, so did Frederick. The watchers saw only the formality. Benedict's gaze moved to Frederick. "Lord Montclair." "Lord Ashbourne." No handshake was offered, none was expected. Between the 2 men stood 7 years of forged letters, poisoned assumptions, and a woman neither of them wished to see harmed. Eleanor felt Clara shift beside her. She tightened her fingers slightly around her daughter's hand, a warning. Clara ignored it. Her eyes were fixed on Benedict. Up close, he was taller than she expected, sterner too. He looked like the sort of gentleman adults lowered their voices around. But Clara had not been raised in London drawing rooms. She had been raised in a cottage where truth, when hidden, pressed on the walls until even children could feel it. This man mattered. She knew it by the way her mother's hand had gone cold. She knew it by the way Edmund had stopped breathing normally. She knew it by the way every adult in the room seemed suddenly afraid of a single conversation. So Clara stepped forward. Eleanor's grip tightened too late. "Clara," she whispered, but Clara had already lifted her chin and looked directly up at Benedict Ashbourne. "Are you the gentleman who made Mama cry?" Not quieted, froze. The words struck the room with the force of a dropped glass shattering across marble. A lady near the refreshment table gasped. Someone whispered. Good heavens, Emmeline's smile vanished for half a heartbeat before she rebuilt it. Ivor Harrington, standing near a group of older gentlemen, went very still. For the first time in many years, no answer came to him. He looked down at the child. This little girl with his mother's chin and Eleanor's fire, this child who might be his. This child who had just accused him before the whole of London. And the terrible thing was not her boldness, it was the pain behind it. Children did not invent such questions from nothing. Somewhere, somehow, this girl had learned that he belonged to her mother's sorrow. Benedict slowly lowered himself to one knee. The movement sent another shock through the room. A viscount did not kneel in the middle of his own ballroom, not before a child, not before gossip, Not before a wife believed dead and an intended bride, watching with hardening eyes, but Benedict Ashbourne did. He lowered it himself until his gaze was level with Clara's, then very quietly he asked, "Is that what she told you?" Eleanor's face tightened. Clara's eyes narrowed. "No." The answer was immediate, clear. "She never says your name. That is how I knew it mattered." The cut was cleaner than any insult could have been. A murmur swept through the guests, but Benedict heard none of it clearly. "She never says your name. That is how I knew it mattered." He looked past Clara to Eleanor. For the first time, something like grief moved openly across his face. Eleanor held herself still beneath it. Do not look away. Do not soften. Do not remember. But memory had never obeyed her. She remembered his hand closing around hers in a dark carriage. She remembered him reading aloud by the fire. She remembered the night she had gone to him with joy in her heart and left with silence where trust had been. Benedict looked back at Clara. "I see. You should," Clara said. Softly, sharper this time, Edmund stepped forward and reached for his sister's sleeve. "Come back." His voice was low, controlled, and careful. Benedict looked at him again. The boy stiffened slightly under the attention, but did not retreat. "What is your name?" Benedict asked. The room seemed to lean closer. Edmund glanced once at his mother. Eleanor could not save him from the question. "Not here. Not now." "Edmund Hartwell, my lord. Hartwell." The name landed between them like a locked door. "Not Ashbourne. Hartwell." Benedict absorbed it without blinking, but something in his face changed. A man may survive many wounds by refusing to show them, but some strike too deeply for dignity to hide. His son, perhaps, bearing another family's name, raised under another roof. Taught to call him my lord, Benedict's gaze lowered briefly to Edmund's hands, small hands folded carefully before him. The exact gesture Benedict had used as a boy when summoned before his father. His throat tightened. "How old are you, Master Hartwell?" "7. My lord." A faint sound escaped somewhere in the room. 7. Eleanor closed her eyes for 1 second, only one. Frederick shifted beside her, as though ready to place himself between her and the entire room if necessary. Benedict's face went still. 7 years. The number opened beneath him like a grave. 7 years since Eleanor vanished. 7 years since he woke drugged and ill to find her letter. 7 years since he was told she had left because their marriage had failed. 7 years since he began mourning a woman who now stood before him with 2 children of the same age as his loss. Clara saw his expression. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes, only briefly, then anger returned to protect it. Eleanor forced herself to speak. "Forgive us. My lord, the children are tired from travel." Clara has an unfortunate habit of speaking too plainly when she is overtired. It was a graceful attempt, almost believable. No one believed it. His eyes remained on the children a moment longer before returning to Eleanor. "Overspeaking is not always a fault," he said. Emmeline stepped in before Eleanor could answer. "How generous of you, my lord." Her laugh was light, but too sharp beneath the silk. Children often misunderstand as adult sorrows. Lady Ashbourne has clearly lived under difficult circumstances. Lady Ashbourne, Benedict said, without looking away from Eleanor, has clearly survived them. The room heard it, so did Emmeline. A flicker of embarrassment crossed her face before she lowered her lashes. Ivor Harrington began moving quietly toward them, not quickly. A man like Ivor never hurried in public. He approached with a statesman's calm and a debtor's fear hidden beneath it. "Lord Ashbourne," he said warmly. "This is a most unexpected blessing. Lady Ashbourne, we are all astonished. Overjoyed, of course." Eleanor looked at him. There were faces one never forgot. Ivor's was one. He had been present at Ashbourne dinners years ago, always laughing gently, always watching accounts more closely than conversations. Emmeline's elder brother, charming when required, harmless to those who did not know the weight of his ambition. But now, looking at him, Eleanor felt the strange sensation of danger recognizing itself. "My lord," she said. Ivor's smile deepened. "And these are your children?" The question was soft, too soft. Frederick answered before Eleanor could. "Lady Eleanor's children are under my protection tonight." Benedict's head turned sharply toward him. "My protection," Frederick repeated, calm and deliberate as escort. The old wound flared in Benedict's eyes. Eleanor saw it. The jealousy, the bitterness, the confirmation of a lie she still did not fully understand. But this was not the place. Not before Emmeline. Not before children who already knew too much. Clara, however, had not finished. She looked from Frederick to Benedict, then back again. "Lord Frederick is kind," she announced. Eleanor wanted the floor to open. Frederick coughed once behind his hand. Benedict's expression hardened. Clara continued, "Merciless in the way only children can be when telling the truth. He brought Edmund a book for the road, and Mama was not frightened when he was near. That did it." The whispering began again, louder this time. Eleanor felt heat rise to her face. "Clara," enough this time. The child heard the pain beneath the command. She stepped back. Edmund gently took her hand. Benedict watched the small movement. Brother protecting sister, sister defending mother, children bound together by a life he had not known existed. He looked at Eleanor again. So many questions pressed behind his eyes that the air between them seemed to strain. Are they mine? Where have you been? Why did you not tell me? Why are you with him? Why did you let me mourn you? But he asked none of them, not there, not before the ton, not before the children. That restraint, more than any accusation, unsettled Eleanor. She had expected him to claim, to condemn, to demand. Instead, he turned back to Clara. His voice softened. You should listen to your mother. Clara looked up at him. For one moment she seemed ready to argue. Then she glanced at Eleanor and saw the exhaustion carefully hidden beneath her composure. Clara's mouth closed. Yes, my lord. The answer was polite, not obedient. Benedict almost smiled, almost, but grief stood too close. The room slowly remembered how to breathe. A few guests pretended to speak of weather. The musicians, after receiving a desperate look from the master of ceremonies, attempted to resume a gentler piece. No one danced. How could they? Every person in that ballroom had come to celebrate Benedict Ashbourne's engagement to Emmeline Harrington. Instead, they had watched his dead wife return with 2 children who looked too much like him. Emmeline moved beside him again. My lord, this time for his ears alone. Perhaps we should withdraw. This scene is becoming unfortunate. Benedict's reply was equally quiet. The scene became unfortunate 7 years ago. Her eyes flashed. Only briefly, but Eleanor saw it, so did Ivor. Benedict turned to the nearest servant. See that Lady Ashbourne and her party are given refreshment and privacy if they desire it. My lord, the servant said, bowing quickly. Eleanor lifted her chin. Benedict looked at her. No, her voice remained calm. I did not come to faint in a side room. Something passed between them then, a shadow of the woman she had been. A shadow of the man who had once admired her courage more than her compliance. Benedict bowed his head slightly. As you wish, as you wish. The phrase touched an old memory, a winter morning. A carriage delayed by snow, Eleanor insisting she could walk through the garden despite the cold. Benedict offering his arm and saying, with that rare warmth hidden inside restraint, as you wish, my heart. He had not said my heart tonight, but Eleanor heard the ghost of it anyway. She hated herself for hearing it. The ball continued, but not truly. People moved because society always moved. Fans opened, glasses lifted, conversations restarted in broken pieces. Yet every eye returned and again to Eleanor, to Frederick, to the twins, to Benedict, to Emmeline's fixed smile, to Ivor's carefully measured calm. Edmund remained close to his mother. Clara watched Benedict. Benedict watched all 3 of them. And Eleanor felt the walls of 7 years beginning to crack under the weight of everything unsaid. Later, when the evening had thinned and the guests had grown bold enough to pretend they were not desperate for scandal, a footman approached Eleanor with a silver tray. Upon it lay a folded note. She knew before touching it, her body knew. The same way it had known the physician's words would change her life. The same way it had known the voice behind the screen had broken it. She lifted the note. The handwriting was unmistakable. Strong, controlled Benedict's. She opened it, beneath the shadow of a marble column. Viscount Ashbourne requests your presence in the library. No ornament, no plea, no accusation, only the summons. Eleanor looked across the ballroom. Benedict stood near the far doors, half turned away from Emmeline, his eyes already on her. He knew. Perhaps not everything. Not yet, but enough. He had seen Edmund's eyes. He had seen Clara's chin. He had counted 7 years in a single breath. Eleanor folded the note. Her hand did not tremble this time. Frederick leaned near. What does he want? Eleanor kept her gaze on Benedict. What any man would want after seeing his face on a child he never met. Clara looked up sharply. Edmund went very still. Eleanor pressed the note into her palm. The library. Of all rooms, the room where Benedict had once read to her during storms. The room where she had once believed no sorrow could enter if he was beside her. Now it waited like a courtroom. She knew what he would ask. And worse, she knew he already knew. Eleanor walked to Benedict's library as though she were walking toward a sentence already passed. The corridors of Ashbourne Hall had not changed. That was the first cruelty. After 7 years, she had expected the house to feel unfamiliar. She had expected some mercy from time, new carpets, new paintings, new servants who did not remember her footsteps, a rearranged table, a different lamp, some visible proof that the world had moved forward while she had been buried alive in society's memory. But Ashbourne Hall remembered. The candle sconces along the corridor still cast the same gold light across the dark panelled walls. The crimson runner still softened the sound of steps. The portraits still watched from their heavy frames. Generations of Ashbourne men and women staring down with the same grave authority that had once made Eleanor feel both protected and judged. She passed the window where Benedict had once found her watching snow fall over the gardens. She passed the alcove where he had quietly taken her hand after a dinner in which Lady Emmeline Harrington had spoken too sweetly of heirs. She passed the nursery corridor and did not look down it. Not some doors in a house were only wood, others were wounds. Behind her, the ball continued in the distance. Music had resumed, though it sounded thinner now, more careful. As if every note feared being overheard by scandal, voices rose and fell in polite waves. Somewhere a woman laughed too brightly. But ahead of Eleanor there was only the library door, brass handle. Yes, the same door Benedict had once opened for her on rainy afternoons, when he pretended to be reading estate papers, and she pretended not to notice he had chosen the chair nearest hers. This room had held some of their happiest memories. Now it waited like judgment. A footman standing nearby bowed and opened the door. Eleanor entered. The library was lit by a low fire and several candles burning in silver holders. The shelves climbed high along the walls, filled with leather-bound books and ledgers older than some families. Heavy curtains framed the tall windows, beyond which the night pressed black against the glass. Benedict stood near one of those windows. His back was partly turned. His hands were clasped behind him. To anyone else he might have seemed composed. Eleanor knew better. The stillness was too severe. The silence around him too sharp. The door closed behind her. For a moment neither spoke. 7 years stood between them. 7 years of false mourning. 7 years of hidden children. 7 years of questions so heavy they had become their own language. At last Benedict turned. The candlelight struck his face. He looked older than she remembered. Though not weaker, grief had not diminished him. It had carved him into something more dangerous. His features were leaner, his eyes darker, his mouth held with the restraint of a man who had survived by refusing to be seen falling apart. But tonight that restraint had begun to crack. The question was quiet. No greeting, no accusation, no careful path toward the truth. Only that. Are they mine? Eleanor had prepared for anger. She had prepared for pride. She had prepared for him to accuse her of deceit before she could even draw breath. She had not prepared for the sorrow in his voice. It entered the room before the question finished. It crossed the space between them and found the part of her she had tried to seal away. She lifted her chin. They are children, Benedict. Not property to be claimed. His eyes flashed. Do not make this smaller by making me sound cruel. Words struck, not savage, but exact. Eleanor looked away first. A small victory for him, a small defeat for her. Benedict stepped away from the window. The boy has my eyes. The girl has my mother's chin. Still, she said nothing. He came closer, slowly. As if approaching too quickly might frighten truth back into hiding. They are 7 tightened. Yes, his face changed, only slightly. But enough. Then I will ask again. The fire snapped softly behind him. Are they mine? Eleanor's gloved fingers curled at her sides. A lie rose in her mouth. It would have been easy in form, if not in souls. No. No, Benedict. You are mistaken. They are not yours. But the lie could not survive the memory of Edmund standing still beneath Benedict's gaze. It could not survive Clara's lifted chin. It could not survive the fact that blood had spoken in the ballroom more loudly than Eleanor ever had. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. Yes, the word entered the room like a bell tolling. Benedict did not move. For several seconds, he seemed not to understand it, though he had demanded it. Yes, yes, they were his. Yes, the boy who had called him my lord was his son. Yes, the girl who had asked if he made her mother cry was his daughter. Yes, while he had mourned a wife, his children had been living beneath another name. His breath left him slowly. He turned away. Not fully. Just enough that Eleanor could no longer see all of his face. That frightened her more than rage would have done. Did you know? He asked. Her voice was almost a whisper. What? He looked back at her. Did you know you carried them? The room narrowed. Eleanor felt the walls move closer. There it was, the question she had feared more than any other. The question that took all her reasons and held them against a candle until the shadows behind them showed. Benedict's eyes closed. He did not speak. He did not strike the desk. He did not curse. He did not call her cruel. He simply stood there with his eyes closed, as if receiving a wound so deep the body had not yet decided whether to bleed. Eleanor's own pain rose in defense. I did what I had to do. Did you? The softness was gone now, not replaced by rage. Worse, by grief sharpened into clarity. Benedict, I missed their first breaths. The sentence was almost calm. That made it unbearable. Eleanor's lips parted, but no answer came. I missed the first time they opened their eyes, the first time they cried, the first time they slept through a night, the first time they were ill, the first time they laughed, their first words, their first birthdays. His voice roughened. He turned away again, one hand pressing briefly against the edge of the desk. The first time they asked where I was. Eleanor's heart twisted. She saw Edmund at 5 years old, holding a wooden horse, asking whether fathers had names. She saw Clara at the window asking if theirs was dead. To us he had to be. I mourned a wife. His voice lowered. I did not know I was mourning a son and daughter who were still alive. Eleanor's composure broke at the edges, a breath caught in her chest. Do not speak as if I kept them from joy. No, he said, turning back to her. You kept them from me. The words struck harder than she expected. Because they were true, and because they were not the whole truth. I kept them from a house where their mother could be replaced before she even had the chance to speak. Benedict's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Eleanor swallowed. She had not meant to say it. Not yet, not in that way. It means I saw enough. Saw what? His voice had changed. Beneath the grief something else stirred. Confusion, danger. The first tremor of a truth neither of them understood. Eleanor looked toward the fire. The flame blurred. I went to your chamber that night. Benedict became very still. Yes. Why? She placed one hand unconsciously over the place where her children had once rested beneath her heart. To tell you, he stared at her. For one moment, the past stood alive between them. Eleanor in an ivory gown, carrying hope through a candlelit corridor. Benedict unconscious behind another locked door, a painted screen, a stolen robe, a voice-speaking ruin. She could not say it all, not yet. The words were too large, too old. Too, she said only. I heard Lady Emmeline. Benedict's face hardened. What did you hear? Eleanor's throat tightened. Enough to understand your future had been arranged without me. His expression shifted from anger to bafflement. My future? With her? With Emmeline? The disbelief in his voice was so sharp it almost sounded honest. Eleanor hated that it sounded honest. She was in your chamber, Benedict. He went still. Then he signed slowly, no. Eleanor's eyes lifted to his, no. A bitter little laugh escaped her. I know what I saw. Then tell me. The command was quiet. But it carried the old authority of Viscount arrogance. Discipline. A man used to forcing facts out of confusion. Eleanor's hands trembled once, then stilled. I browsed your robes drew together. I saw your signet ring. His face changed again. I saw a man behind the screen. I heard his voice. Eleanor. And I heard Lady Emmeline speak of duty, of giving Ashbourne what I could not, of a future that required an heir. Then the man behind the screen said, her voice failed. Benedict took one step forward. Said what? Eleanor looked him in the eye. A viscount cannot build his future on a barren wife. The room went silent. Not the silence of restraint, the silence of impact. Benedict stared at her as if the words had reached him from some far distance, in a language he understood too well and not at all. His face slowly drained of color. I never said that. Eleanor's heart thudded once hard. She forced herself not to react. Of course you would say so now. I never said that. His voice was not defensive. It was horrified, and horror, unlike anger, was difficult to counterfeit. Eleanor looked away. No more, Eleanor, no more tonight. There must be more tonight. She turned back sharply. You are not the only one who lost something. The words silenced him. Her eyes shone now, though no tears fell. I carried them alone. I bore them with no husband holding my hand. I gave them names that would not summon the people who might take them from me. I listened to my son ask questions he was too kind to finish. I watched my daughter grow fierce because she could feel a wound no one would explain. Do not stand there and speak to me as if your grief is the only grief with a right to breathe. Benedict's face changed. Not softened, not exactly. But the blow landed. For the first time that night he looked beyond his own loss and saw hers standing beside it. I did not know, he said. Eleanor's voice broke. That was the point. The sentence hung between them, terrible in its simplicity. Benedict's gaze dropped to the floor. When he spoke again, his voice had turned colder, and Frederick Montclair. Eleanor stiffened. What of him? Benedict looked up. There it was. The old alive, still ugly, still bleeding beneath his control. Was he there when they were born? Eleanor understood then that this question was not only about the twins. It was about 7 years of believing another man had stood in his place. Another man had heard Eleanor cry out. Another man had seen the first breath of Benedict's children. Another man had been trusted when Benedict had not. Her answer required care. Too much truth would wound, too little would lie. He was there when no one else could be. Benedict flinched as though she had struck him. For a moment, jealousy moved plainly across his face. Then it vanished behind control. No, Eleanor said softly. You do not. His eyes met hers. Then explain it. I cannot explain 7 years in one night. I have only been given one night. That silenced her. The clock on the mantel ticked once, then again. Outside the library, footsteps passed and faded. Finally, Benedict said, I wish to meet them properly. Eleanor's answer was immediate. No. His jaw tightened. They are my children. They are children, and they have already been made a spectacle tonight. I did not make them one. Your house did. My house beat their mother dead. The words struck both of them. Eleanor looked away first. Benedict drew a slow breath. I will not take them from you. She turned back. Do you expect me to trust that? No, the answer was so immediate that it unsettled her. He continued. I expect nothing from you, but I am asking to stand before my son and daughter as more than a stranger in a ballroom. Eleanor looked at him for a long while, then she said, Tomorrow morning in Louisa's sitting room, not alone. Benedict bowed his head once. Thank you. The formality of it nearly broke her. Thank you. As though she had granted him a dance. As though this were not the first doorway into a life that should never have been closed, Eleanor turned to leave. At the door he spoke again. Eleanor. She stopped, turned. If I did not say those words, her hand tightened on the door handle. If I was not in that room, her heart began to beat faster. Then someone wanted you to believe I was. Eleanor closed her eyes. Certainty had been her shelter, now it had become a room with cracks in every wall. She opened the door and left without answering. The next morning arrived pale and cold. London lay under a thin mist and Ashbourne Hall seemed quieter than usual, as if the house itself understood that something irreversible had begun. Lady Louisa Hartwell's sitting room had been chosen because it belonged to neither the past nor Benedict's authority. It was smaller than the formal drawing rooms, warmer with a soft green carpet, cream walls, and a fire burning low beneath the mantel. Eleanor sat near the window, Louisa stood behind her chair, Frederick remained near the door, silent, respectful, present. Edmund and Clara stood together by the hearth. Edmund had dressed carefully, more carefully than usual. His hair had been combed flat, though one dark lock had escaped across his forehead. He held a small book in both hands, though he had not turned a page since entering the room. Clara wore a pale yellow morning dress and an expression of armed suspicion. When the door opened, both children went still. Benedict entered alone. He had chosen his clothing with care, though not vanity, a dark morning coat, grey waistcoat, simple cravat. No display of rank beyond what he could not remove from his posture. At the threshold he paused. His gaze went first to Eleanor, a silent question. Eleanor gave the smallest nod. Only then did he come forward. He did not stand over the children. He knelt, just as he had knelt before Clara in the ballroom. But here, without an audience, the gesture felt different, less shocking, more vulnerable. He looked at Edmund first, then Clara. "Good morning." Edmund bowed slightly. "Good morning, my lord." Clara said nothing. Benedict accepted both responses as if they were equally deserved. "I owe you honesty," he said. Clara's eyes narrowed. "That would be unusual." "Clara," Eleanor warned. Benedict lifted one hand slightly. "No, she is not wrong to doubt me." That silenced Clara more effectively than correction would have done. Benedict looked at both children. "I did not know you existed." Edmund's fingers tightened around his book. Clara's chin lifted. "If you are our father," she said, "why did you let us grow up without one?" The question entered the room and struck every adult silent. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Frederick looked down. Louisa pressed her lips together. Benedict did not look away from Clara. He did not defend himself with the ease of a gentleman trained for argument. He did not say the matter was complicated. He did not say children could not understand. He answered her, "I did not know." Clara's expression did not soften, and that is all. His voice roughened. "That will be the sorrow of my life." Something shifted in Edmund's face, not forgiveness, but attention. He studied Benedict more closely, as if trying to decide whether sorrow could be trusted. Clara crossed her arm and knew. Benedict flushed. "Yes, so someone knew, yes." "Then why did no one tell you?" Eleanor's hand trembled in her lap. Benedict looked briefly toward her. There were answers, but none a child should carry before the adults had found the truth themselves, so he said, "Because the grown people in this story failed each other before you were old enough to speak." Clara blinked. She had expected denial. "Not that." Benedict looked back at her. "That does not excuse the hurt you felt." Clara looked away first, a small victory. Or perhaps the beginning of something more fragile. Edmund spoke then. His voice was quiet. "Did you ever wonder?" No one moved. Benedict turned to him. The boy's eyes were fixed on his face, not forgiving, searching. "Did I ever wonder what?" Benedict asked, though some part of him already feared the answer. Edmund swallowed. "About us." The room seemed to lose all air. Benedict's face changed. His control, already strained, gave way. Not loudly, not dramatically, but visibly. A man can endure an accusation from an enemy. A man can survive scandal, betrayal, even public shame. But a child asking whether he had ever been imagined before being known, that was a different kind of blade. Benedict drew one breath, then another. "No," he said. The honesty was brutal. Eleanor's eyes filled. Edmund looked down. Benedict continued, voice low. "I wondered about your mother every day." Eleanor's breath caught. "I wondered why she left. I wondered whether she was safe. I wondered what I had done or failed to do. Later, when I was told she had died, I wondered whether she had suffered." He looked at Edmund. "But I did not know to wonder about you." Edmund's mouth tightened. Benedict's voice broke at the edge. "And I shall regret that until my last breath." For a moment Edmund looked very young, not solemn, not careful, just a boy who had asked too dangerous a question and received the truth. Clara reached for his hand. He let her take it. Saw the movement. Brother and sister, his children, protecting each other from a pain that had begun before they were born. "I cannot ask you to forgive me," he said. Clara answered immediately. "Good." Benedict almost bowed his head. "But I would like permission to try to know you." Clara studied him. "Permission from whom?" "From you." That surprised her. Adults do not usually ask children permission. They should ask more often. Clara had no answer to that. Edmund looked at Eleanor. There it was, the question beneath all questions. "May I want this?" Eleanor felt the full weight of motherhood in that glance. For 7 years she had protected them from Benedict. Now her son was asking whether protection and deprivation had worn the same face. She gave the smallest nod. Edmund turned back to Benedict. "What do you wish to know?" Benedict's expression softened with a pain almost too deep for words. Everything. The answer was simple, but it held 7 lost years inside it. Clara remained unbelievable. Eleanor watched them both and felt the ground beneath her heart begin to shift, because Benedict's grief had not looked rehearsed. His regret had not sounded convenient, and when Edmund asked if he had ever wondered, Benedict had not tried to make himself noble. He had told the truth, though it made him smaller in his own son's eyes. That was the worst part, the most dangerous part, the part Eleanor had not prepared for. Benedict Ashbourne might be telling the truth, and if he was, then the night she fled Ashbourne Hall had not ended with one betrayal. It had begun with a lie large enough to steal a wife from her husband, a father from his children, and 7 years from them all. Over the next several days, Viscount Benedict Ashbourne learned that blood could open a door, but it could not force anyone to enter. He had imagined, perhaps foolishly, that knowing would change everything at once. Knowing they were his, knowing Edmund's quiet eyes had come from him, knowing Clara's proud chin had once belonged to his mother, knowing that beneath the borrowed Hartwell, 2 children carried Ashbourne in their bones, but knowledge was not the same as belonging. A father was not made by truth alone. Not after 7 years, not after silence had raised the children in his place. So Benedict did something that surprised Eleanor more than any demand could have done. He did not demand, he did not summon solicitors, he did not announce his rights. He did not insist the children be moved into the Ashbourne nursery, or presented immediately to the family steward as heirs. He simply appeared quietly, carefully. Every morning at a reasonable hour he came to the small sitting room where Eleanor, Louisa, and the children had taken temporary refuge within Ashbourne Hall. He knocked before entering. He waited to be admitted. He bowed to Eleanor with a restraint so formal it almost looked like pain. Then he turned to Edmund and Clara as if they were not possessions to be claimed, but people whose permission mattered. This disturbed Eleanor. She had prepared herself against force. She had not prepared herself against patience. Force she could resist. Patience found cracks in places she had thought sealed. On the first morning, Benedict brought nothing. No sweets, no toys. No grand gesture meant to purchase affection from children who had every reason to distrust him. He entered, greeted them, and asked Edmund what he was reading. Edmund glanced down at the book in his lap. A history of English estates, my lord. Benedict's brow lifted slightly. An unusual choice. Ah, a pause followed. Clara, sitting near the window with her arms crossed, said, he likes maps because they show you where people are supposed to be. Eleanor looked at her sharply. Benedict absorbed the comment without flinching. Maps can be useful for that, he said. Then he looked at Edmund. They can also show where people have been prevented from going. Edmund's eyes lifted. For one brief second, something passed between father and son. Not trust. Recognition, perhaps. The quiet recognition of 2 people who knew that silence could be a country of its own. The next day, Benedict returned with a large rolled parchment beneath one arm. Clara narrowed her eyes immediately. What is that? An estate map? I did not ask for a present. It is not a present for you. Clara blinked, offended, before she could stop herself. Benedict turned to Edmund. I thought you might wish to see how Ashbourne lands are arranged. Edmund looked at his mother. Eleanor's heart tightened. There it was again. That silent request. May I? She had become used to protecting him from harm. She was less prepared to protect him from hope. She nodded once. Edmund rose slowly, as though afraid eagerness might betray him. Benedict spread the map across the table. It was beautifully drawn, old but carefully preserved, with fields, tenant cottages, woodland borders, streams, grazing land, and the great house itself marked in dark ink. Edmund leaned closer. Clara remained at the window, pretending not to look. Benedict pointed to the northern boundary. This is Ashbourne Wood. In spring, the ground is covered in bluebells. In autumn, it floods if the rain is heavy because the stream here overflows. Edmund traced the line with his eyes. Why has no one changed the stream? Because water is less obedient than men think. Edmund looked at him then. Benedict almost smiled. Also because my grandfather attempted it and made the flooding worse. For the first time, Edmund's mouth softened, not quite a smile, but close enough that Eleanor felt the room shift. Benedict continued. These are the tenant farms. This road leads to the West Mill. This cottage here belongs to Mr. Wren, who grows the finest apples in the county and pretends not to know when children steal them from the lower branches. Clara turned her head. I do not steal apples. No one accused you. Of course. Edmund asked, did you steal apples? Benedict looked at the map for a moment, as if considering whether truth was wise. Yes. Clara's brows rose. Eleanor looked away to hide the ache that rose without warning. That was the voice she remembered. Dry. Quiet. Softened at the edges only when no one expected it. Edmund leaned closer to the map. Did you get caught? Repeatedly. This time Edmund did smile. It was small, careful, but Benedict saw it. The effect on him was almost invisible to anyone else. A slight stillness, a faint intake of breath. A man who had just been given 1 coin of a treasure he had lost 7 years before knowing it existed. Clara saw it too, and because Clara was Clara, she punished him for it. You should not teach him to steal apples. Benedict turned to her. You are right. I usually am. Then I shall say instead that stealing apples is wrong, even when they are very ripe and the owner has poor eyesight. Edmund looked down quickly. Louisa coughed behind her hand. Eleanor pressed her lips together. Clara stared at Benedict for a long moment, as if angered by the fact that he had almost amused her. I still do not like you, she said. Benedict bowed his head. I did not expect you to. That was how it went. A step forward, a step back, sometimes 2 steps back. Benedict appeared each day not as a conquering father, but as a man willing to stand in the doorway of his children's distrust and wait. He taught Edmund how to read more than land upon a map, how a stream affected crops, how a tenant's field told a story of soil, weather and care, how a great estate was not merely a house with portraits, but 100 smaller lives depending on decisions made by men who too often forgot the faces behind their ledgers. Edmund listened with fierce attention while pretending not to. That was his way. He would ask one question, then fall silent for 10 minutes. But later, when he thought no one watched, he would copy Benedict's handwriting from labels on the map. Eleanor found the first page by accident. It lay half hidden beneath Edmund's pillow. Ashbourne Wood, West Mill, northern boundary. The words were written carefully, each letter shaped in imitation of Benedict's firm. Eleanor sat on the edge of Edmund's bed and stared at the paper until her eyes blurred. Her son was not merely learning from his father. He was reaching toward him, secretly, guiltily, as though wanting a father required betrayal of his mother. That realization hurt more than any accusation. Because Eleanor had never wished Edmund to feel divided, she had protected him from Benedict to save him from pain, but pain had found him anyway. It had simply worn the shape of longing. Clara, meanwhile, chose war. On the 3rd day, Benedict brought her a book, not a jeweled trinket. Not a doll, a book. Its cover was green leather, modest but fine, with gilt edging along the pages. Eleanor saw the title and felt her heart twist. Lives of Courageous Ladies and Noble Heroines. Clara eyed it as if it were a snake. What is that? A book? I can see that, for you. I do not accept gifts from men who make ladies cry. The sitting room went silent. Louisa looked down at her embroidery. Edmund stared at the carpet. Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap. Benedict did not defend himself. He did not look wounded, though he was. He simply placed the book on the small table beside Clara's chair. Then do not accept it as a gift. What should I accept it as? A challenge? That caught her. She looked at the book despite herself. What sort of challenge? To discover whether any lady inside it is bolder than you. Clara's eyes narrowed. I suspected as much. You are trying to trick me into reading it. You admit it? I find lies have served this family poorly. Room became very still again. Eleanor looked at him. Benedict's gaze did not leave Clara, but the words had clearly been meant for more than the child. Clara reached for the book, then stopped herself. I still do not accept it. Of course, Benedict bowed and left it there. That night, Eleanor passed Clara's door and saw a thin line of candlelight beneath it. She opened the door softly. Clara was in bed with the green book open across her blanket. She froze. Eleanor leaned against the doorframe. I thought you did not accept it. Clara lifted her chin. I'm inspecting the enemy's tactics. I see. There is a lady in here who dressed as a boy and carried messages during a war. That was not as brave as me. No, darling. Very few people are. Clara looked down at the page, then said quietly, Do you think he chose the book himself? Eleanor's throat tightened. I do not. Nera pretended to read. After a moment, she whispered, I hope he did, because then he knows I am not stupid. Eleanor crossed the room and kissed her forehead. No one who has ever met you would make that mistake. Clara did not smile, but she did not close the book. Benedict noticed things. That was another danger. He noticed that Edmund preferred standing where he could see every door. He noticed that Clara disliked being corrected in front of strangers, but accepted correction in private if given respect. He noticed that Eleanor drank tea without lemon now. The first time he saw it, he frowned faintly. You no longer take lemon? Eleanor looked up. They were seated in Louisa's sitting room with the children at the table nearby. Frederick had just entered, bringing a letter from the village where Louisa's steward remained. It became difficult to obtain regularly. The answer was small, practical. But Benedict heard everything inside it. The years in a cottage, the reduced household, the careful economies, the life she had built while carrying his children under another name. I shall have it sent, he said. No, he paused. No, she repeated, softer but firmer. It is never only anything here. Benedict accepted the rebuke. But the next morning, a small bowl of sliced lemons appeared on the tea tray. Eleanor looked at it, then at him. Benedict said nothing. Clara watched both of them with narrowed eyes. Frederick's presence complicated everything. He remained Eleanor's escort in public, because London had not stopped staring. In the park at church, in any drawing room where duty forced them to appear, Frederick stayed near enough to protect without touching what was not his. He was honorable. That was the problem. If he had been vain, Benedict could have despised him cleanly. If he had been possessive, Benedict could have challenged him with righteous certainty. But Frederick Montclair never overstepped. He did not call Eleanor by familiar endearments. He did not place a hand at her back. He did not attempt to father's place with the twins. He only stood where danger might reach and made himself a shield. One afternoon, Benedict found him alone in the west corridor near the tall windows overlooking the gardens. Frederick had been reading a note. He folded it when Benedict approached. Lord Ashbourne. The corridor was quiet. Neither man pretended not to understand why conversation had become inevitable. Benedict stood with one hand resting lightly upon the head of his cane. Frederick waited. At last Benedict said, "Did you love her?" Frederick did not ask whom he meant. He looked out toward the gardens for a moment. No, Benedict's jaw tightened, though the answer should have relieved him. Frederick turned back. The words landed strangely, calmly, without apology. At the time, Frederick continued, "That was more useful." Benedict's face hardened. "You imply I did not respect my wife. I imply nothing. I state only what I gave when she needed help." Frederick's expression changed. Not anger. Not quite. A deep, controlled disapproval. She needed someone to believe she was afraid for a reason. Benedict went very still. The words passed between them like a drawn blade. Frederick bowed slightly. "Good day, Lord Ashbourne." He left Benedict standing in the corridor with a question he did not yet know how to answer. That evening, Benedict and Eleanor found themselves alone in the library. It happened by accident, or perhaps by the design of a house that had held too many secrets. Eleanor had come searching for a ribbon Clara had lost earlier. Benedict had returned to retrieve papers he had forgotten upon the desk. The servants had already lowered the lamps. The fire burned quietly, turning the room amber and shadowed. They both stopped when they saw each other. "Forgive me," Eleanor said. "I thought the room empty." "So did I." Neither moved. The library held memories too densely. A younger Eleanor curled in the chair by the hearth, Benedict standing behind her, reading from a book he claimed was important while she laughed at his serious voice. Rain against the windows, tea gone cold. A life so ordinary in its tenderness that neither had understood it could be stolen. Eleanor crossed toward the small table near the window. "I will only be a moment." Benedict saw the ribbon before she did, pale blue, caught beneath the leg of a chair. He bent to retrieve it at the same time she did. Their hands met, not fully, only fingertips over a fallen ribbon. But the contact struck the island. Eleanor's breath caught. Benedict's hand stilled beneath hers. 7 years disappeared with terrifying ease. Her glove was thin. He could feel the warmth of her through it. She drew back first. "Thank you." He held out the ribbon. She took it without touching him again. For a moment, he looked as though he might say something formal. Instead, he said, "You wore blue the first spring after we married." Eleanor looked at him. His voice was low. There was a garden party at Westcliff House. "You hated the lemonade because they had put lavender in it." Despite herself, she remembered. "You said it tasted like perfume. You said perfume would have been kinder." The faintest ghost of a smile touched her mouth. It vanished almost immediately. Benedict saw it vanish. Pain crossed his face. "I remember too much," he said. Eleanor looked down at the ribbon. Silence. Then he said, "I never stopped loving you." The words entered the room without ornament. No dramatic plea, no attempt to win, only truth. Tired of waiting, Eleanor closed her eyes. For a moment she looked as though she might break. Then she opened them, and the softness had become sorrow. "Love without trust can still destroy a woman." Benedict absorbed it. "I know," she whispered. "You know loss. You do not yet know what it was to be me that night. Then tell me." "I tried. You gave me pieces. Pieces are all I survived with." He stepped closer, then stopped before the movement could become a mistake. Eleanor looked up sharply. "To Emmeline." His voice was firm now. "I should never have allowed it to proceed once you returned. I will end it." Something in Eleanor almost softened. Almost. Then he continued, "But I must do it properly. With honor, her family must be informed. The announcement must be withdrawn without unnecessary public humiliation." The softness inside Eleanor froze. Honor, the word struck the old bruise. Of course Emmeline would receive honor. Of course Emmeline would receive careful handling. Of course the woman who had stood in his chamber 7 years ago would be protected from public pain. Eleanor laughed once. A quiet, terrible sound. Benedict frowned. "What is it?" She looked at him then, and the years between them caught fire. "Did honor visit your chamber the night you chose her?" Benedict went still. The room itself seemed to stop breathing. Eleanor's voice trembled, but she did not look away. "Did honor stand beside her when she spoke of duty? Did honor hide behind the screen wearing your robe? Did honor lift your hand with the Ashbourne ring and let me hear that I was barren, useless, replaceable?" Benedict's face drained of color. "Eleanor, no, you asked for pieces. Here is the piece that followed me into every room for 7 years. Her eyes shone now. "I came to tell you I was carrying your child. I came to tell you that the empty nursery would not remain empty. I came to see joy on your face. Benedict, instead I found your door open and Emmeline Harrington in your chamber. Benedict did not move. I saw your robe. I saw your signet ring. I heard the voice. I heard the sentence. A viscount cannot build his future on a barren wife. His hand tightened at his side. No. The word was barely audible, Eleanor continued, because now that the wound had opened, there was no closing it politely. I returned to my chamber. I stood with my hand over our child and understood that if I stayed, that child might be taken from me and raised beneath her smile. Benedict looked stricken. I wrote the letter because I needed you not to follow. His voice changed. Eleanor, I left before dawn because I believed the man I loved had decided I was no longer useful. Benedict stepped back as though the words had physically struck him. For several seconds he said nothing. His eyes searched her face, but not as a man hunting for weakness, as a man watching a nightmare explain itself. Then he spoke, slowly, clearly, each word carrying horror. I was not in that room. Eleanor stared at him. The fire snapped behind them. Outside, somewhere far down the corridor, a servant's footsteps passed and faded. Benedict's voice dropped lower. I was not began to beat hard. No, yes. You saw what someone wanted you to see. The words settled between them like ash. Eleanor's breath caught. The screen, the robe, the signet, the voice, her certainty, which had held her upright for 7 years, began to tilt. Benedict looked suddenly less like a man defending himself and more like a man discovering the shape of the cage that had held them both. I was made ill after dinner that night, he said. I remember the wine, I remember heat, then nothing. I woke the next morning in the inner chamber with a head like iron and your letter on my desk. Eleanor stepped back. No. I thought you had left me. No. I was told later you had fled with Frederick. No. I was told you died abroad. Eleanor's face went white. The ribbon slipped from her fingers and fell silently to the floor. For one long moment, husband and wife stood across from each other in the library where they had once been happiest, no longer accusing, not yet forgiving, only staring at the terrible possibility that their lives had not been destroyed by one another's betrayal, but by someone else's design. Benedict looked toward the door, then back at Eleanor. His face had become something colder than grief, something sharper. Who was in my chamber that night? Eleanor could barely speak. Emmeline, his jaw tightened. I thought it was you. It was not. The silence that followed was worse than any shout, because in that silence Eleanor heard 7 years collapsing. Every birthday Benedict had missed, every question Edmund had swallowed, every angry defense Clara had built. Every lonely night Eleanor had survived by telling herself she had chosen correctly. If Benedict had not been in that room, then the truth was far more terrible and far from finished. Eleanor did not sleep that night. Long after Ashbourne Hall had fallen into that deep, grand silence known only to old houses and guilty rooms, she remained awake beside the dying fire. The chamber given to her faced the east gardens. Once, years ago, she had loved that view. In the early days of her marriage, she would rise before breakfast and watch pale morning creep across the lawns, touching the marble statues, the trimmed hedges, the quiet paths where she and Benedict had walked in the first careful weeks of learning how to belong to one another. Now the window showed only darkness, a black pane, a reflection of her own pale face. She sat in a chair near the hearth, still dressed in the gown she had worn to the library. Her hair had loosened, one pearl comb lay forgotten on the dressing table. Her hands were folded in her lap, but they would not be still. I was not in that room. Benedict's voice would not leave her. It moved through the chamber as if he had spoken the words only moments before. I was not in that room, Eleanor. She closed her eyes immediately. The memory returned. The corridor, the candlelight beneath the door, Emmeline Harrington's voice soft and certain, the robe, the signet ring, the shadow behind the screen, that terrible sentence. A viscount cannot build his future on a barren wife. For 7 years the memory had been solid. A wall, a prison, a weapon. It had explained everything. It had justified the flight, the hidden birth, the borrowed name, the silence that had shaped Edmund and Clara's childhood. It had allowed Eleanor to survive the guilt of keeping Benedict from his children because she had believed that any other choice would have delivered them into the hands of a man already willing to replace their mother. But now the memory had edges missing. She had not seen his face. That thought arrived quietly, then louder. She had not seen Benedict's face. Only the robe, only the ring, only the shape behind the screen, only the voice, a voice close enough to his to break her. But close enough was not truth. Eleanor opened her eyes sharply, as if waking from a nightmare. No, she whispered, because if Benedict had not been there, then the worst thing she had ever done has been done inside a lie, not one lie, many. A lie that made her flee, a lie that made Benedict mourn, a lie that stole 7 years from 2 children who had committed no crime except being born, into a family others wished to control. She rose and crossed to the small adjoining room where Edmund and Clara slept. The door was slightly open. A candle burned low on the table between their beds. Edmund slept curled toward the wall, one hand beneath his cheek, dark hair falling across his forehead, Clara slept less peacefully, one arm outside the blanket, her brow faintly creased even in dreams. Eleanor stood between their beds and looked down at them, her son, her daughter, her hidden heirs. For years, she had told herself secrecy was protection, but what if secrecy had also been another cage? Behind her, floorboards creaked softly. Louisa stood at the threshold in her wrapper, her face drawn with worry. "You have not slept." Eleanor did not turn. "Neither have you." Louisa entered quietly. For a while the two sisters stood together in the faint glow of the candle. At last Eleanor said, "He says he was not there." Louisa's breath caught. Eleanor nodded. "In the chamber that night. He says he was not there." Louisa looked toward the sleeping children. "Do you believe him?" That was the question, the only question that mattered. Eleanor's hand went to Clara's blanket, smoothing a crease that did not need smoothing. "I do not know." But that was not entirely true. The terror inside her was not because she disbelieved Benedict. It was because some part of her did, and some deeper part of her had begun to believe him. By dawn, Benedict Ashbourne had also not slept. He stood in his private dressing room while his valet moved silently behind him, setting out a fresh cravat and dark morning coat. The servant knew better than to comment on his lordship's pallor, or the fact that the candles in the study had burned through the night. Benedict dismissed him before he finished. Then he stood alone before the looking-glass. The man who stared back was one London admired. A man of title, a man of discipline, a man who could endure insult, political betrayal and grief without letting the world see his hands shake. But the mirror did not show the father who had missed 7 years. It did not show the husband whose wife had fled because she believed he had spoken words he would have cut out his own tongue before saying. It did not show the man waking in the inner chamber all those years ago, head heavy, throat dry, memory broken into fragments, the wine at dinner, Ivor Harrington laughing across the table, Emmeline smiling too brightly, a sudden heat rising beneath his collar, the world tilting, then nothing, then Eleanor's letter. "I have been unhappy for some time. This marriage no longer suits either of us. You need an heir and I cannot give you one." Do not follow me how perfectly the letter had cut him, how neatly it had confirmed his deepest fear, that Eleanor had suffered in silence until even love became a burden. Then came Ivor, so sympathetic, so outraged on Benedict's behalf, so careful when he produced hints, whispers, correspondence that placed Frederick Montclair near Eleanor's sorrow. Benedict's hand tightened on the edge of the dressing table. He had believed too much because he had been wounded enough to want an answer, even one that destroyed him. A knock sounded at the door. Benedict did not move. Enter. The door opened. Frederick Montclair stepped inside. For a moment the two men regarded one another in the mirror. Neither bowed, neither smiled. Frederick spoke first. "Lady Eleanor told me what you said." Benedict turned. "She should not have had to tell you anything." "No," Frederick said. "But 7 years have made me part of this, whether either of us likes it." Benedict looked at him sharply. "Were you?" Frederick's expression did not change. "Careful, Ashbourne," Benedict's voice lowered. "Were you part of it?" Frederick stepped fully into the room. "I protected your wife after she fled. I helped her sister find physicians. I arranged discreet travel when gossip grew dangerous. I stood at a distance from children who were not mine and never pretended otherwise." His voice hardened. "But if you are asking whether I touched the lie that drove her from this house, the answer is no." Benedict held his gaze. Then, slowly, he looked away. "I was told she fled with you, I know." Benedict turned back. Frederick's face held an old weariness. "Ivor Harrington made certain the rumor found every ear that mattered, mine included. You never denied it." "I denied what I heard. But scandal does not require permission to grow, and after Eleanor was declared dead abroad, my denials became inconvenient to those who preferred the story finished." Benedict absorbed this. For the first time, the old jealousy had no place to stand. Not entirely. It still existed, raw and human, sharpened by the knowledge that Frederick had seen Eleanor through years Benedict had lost. But it had changed shape. Frederick had not stolen his place. Someone else had removed Benedict from it. "We must find proof," Benedict said. Frederick nodded. "I know where to watch him." "With whom?" Frederick hesitated. "A woman named Beatrice Penrose." The name touched something in Benedict's memory. "A maid. She served at Ashbourne Hall the year Eleanor vanished. She left soon after." "Yes," Frederick said, "and vanished nearly as completely as Eleanor. But unlike Eleanor, she did not have Louisa protecting her." Benedict's eyes sharpened. "You know where she is?" "I know where she was 2 months ago." "Then we go today." Frederick's mouth tightened. "No." Benedict's face went cold. "No? If you appear at her door as Viscount Ashbourne, she may bolt before you ask the first question. Let me find her first. Let me learn whether she is frightened, guilty, or both." Benedict hated the sense in it. That made it no less sense. He nodded once. "Go." Frederick turned to leave. At the door Benedict spoke again. "Montclair." Frederick paused. Benedict looked as though the words cost him. "If you protected her when I could not." A silence. "Then I am indebted." Frederick studied him. "Be careful. Gratitude can sound very much like pain when spoken through clenched teeth. Benedict almost smiled. Then Frederick was gone. But danger had already begun moving elsewhere in the house. Clara Hartwell was not a child who trusted closed doors. This was partly because she had grown up in a cottage where adults lowered their voices whenever truth approached, and partly because Clara possessed the natural conviction that secrets were insults waiting to be challenged. So when she saw Lord Ivor Harrington speaking sharply to a woman near the servants' passage that afternoon, she did not do what a well-behaved child would. She followed. At least she followed at a distance. Clara had learned that adults noticed children when children appeared too interested, so she carried her little green book in one hand and pretended to be searching for a quiet place to read. This allowed her to drift through the corridor without looking like a spy. But Clara was absolutely a spy. Lord Ivor moved with the calm confidence of a man who believed every house had corners meant for his use. He led the woman toward a narrow passage near the old linen rooms where the light was dim and footsteps were muffled by worn carpet. The woman wore a plain bonnet and a dark cloak. Her head remained bowed. Clara could not see her face clearly, but she could see her hands. They were shaking. Clara stopped behind a half-open door. Ivor's voice was low. "Do not be foolish, Beatrice." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Beatrice." The woman's reply was barely audible. "I should not have come." "No," Ivor said. "You should not have written. I was frightened. You were paid." Clara leaned closer. Her heart had begun to beat faster, but not from fear, from certainty. This was one of those moments adults later pretended children could not understand. Clara understood perfectly. A guilty man had cornered a frightened woman. Ivor continued. "You kept your place all these years because you knew how to be silent. Do not become talkative now because a dead woman has walked into a ballroom." Beatrice's voice trembled. "I did what you asked. I left service. I never spoke of it, and you will continue never speaking. I saw the children." The silence that followed was sharp. When Ivor spoke again, his sweetness had vanished. "Listen to me carefully. If you mention the screen, the robe, or the ring to anyone, you will lose everything. Your position, your lodging, your brother's apprenticeship, all of it." Clara's fingers tightened around her book. "The screen, the robe, the ring." Beatrice whispered, "I did not know she was with child." "No one cares what you knew. I did not know. You knew enough to take the money." The woman began to cry softly. Clara stepped back from the door, her small face pale with fury. She wanted to burst into the passage and shout that Lord Ivor was cruel. She wanted to bite him. This, Louisa had once told her, was not considered appropriate behavior for young ladies. Clara decided reluctantly not to bite him yet. Instead, she ran. She found Edmund in the morning room, sitting at a desk with a sheet of paper before him. He was copying a line from one of Benedict's estate maps, though he quickly covered it when she burst in. "I know something," Clara said. Edmund looked up. "You always think you know something. This time I actually do. That is what you always..." She crossed the room and lowered her voice. "I heard Lord Ivor threatening a woman named Beatrice."
Edmund went still.
Clara repeated everything: the screen, the robe, the ring, the money. She finished. Edmund's face had changed completely. He did not flare like Clara. He became quieter, sharper. "That matches what Mama said. I know we must tell her." Clara, Edmund noticed. "What? If we tell the adults? They will tell us to stay in our rooms and not be involved. They are often right in very inconvenient ways." Edmund looked toward the window. What did the woman look like? Frightened. That is not a description. It is the important part. Edmund rose. "Where did Lord Ivor come from before you followed him?" Clara frowned. "The west corridor, near the small writing room." Edmund's eyes moved toward the door. Clara understood at once. "No, you said you wanted to know something. I wanted to know safely. You followed a threatening lord into a servant's passage. That was different. I had a book." Edmund ignored this and moved toward the hall. Clara followed because Clara would sooner walk into a dragon's mouth than let her brother investigate a scandal alone. The small writing room was rarely used during large gatherings. It sat near the west corridor, tucked behind a narrow door furnished with a desk, shelves and cabinets filled with old household correspondence awaiting sorting. It was exactly the sort of place adults forgot children could enter. Edmund and Clara slipped inside. "Look for anything with Harrington," Edmund whispered. Clara opened a drawer. It creaked. They both froze. No footsteps, they continued. Most of the papers were dull beyond forgiveness: invitations, old receipts, lists of flowers, a complaint about candles. Clara was beginning to lose patience when Edmund found a stack of discarded correspondence tied badly with black ribbon. The top letter bore the Harrington crest. He untied it carefully. Clara leaned over his shoulder. "What does it say?" "You read too slowly when under pressure. I read better when not being insulted." He scanned the first sheet, then the next. Nothing. Then a folded paper between two letters and fell beneath the desk. Edmund picked it up. Unlike the others, it had no proper address, only the faint remains of a seal. He held it closer to the light. His face went very still. "What?" Edmund did not answer. He moved to the window where the daylight was stronger. The seal had been broken, but the impression remained. Not perfect, not real, but close. Too close. The Ashbourne crest. Edmund had seen it on the estate map, on the trays, on the footman's buttons. But this one was wrong. A careful copy, an imitation. His heart began to beat hard. Inside the folded paper was a rough draft, blotted and crossed in places, but readable. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, wife of Viscount Ashbourne. Edmund stopped reading. Clara snatched the page. Her face paled. Edmund took the paper back, hands trembling now, not from fear alone, from anger, quiet anger, which in Edmund was more dangerous. They made her dead, he said, and they made him believe it. The door handle turned. Both children froze. Edmund folded the paper quickly and slipped it inside his coat. A maid entered with a dust cloth, saw them, and blinked. Master Edmund, Miss Clara, you ought not be in here. Clara lifting for quiet. The maid looked at the open drawers. It seems you found paper instead. Edmund bowed politely. We are leaving now. They walked out at a normal pace. Then once the corridor turned, Clara grabbed Edmund's sleeve. Edmund nodded. Yes, this time he did not argue. By evening the truth began to gather. Frederick found Beatrice Penrose in a lodging house near the edge of London, where respectability was thin and fear could be bought cheaply. She had aged beyond her years, though she could not have been much past 30. When Frederick told her Eleanor lived, Beatrice began weeping before he finished the sentence. By nightfall she was brought quietly to Ashbourne Hall. Not through the front entrance, not before guests, through a side door into Benedict's private study where Eleanor, Benedict, Frederick, Louisa, Edmund and Clara waited. Clara was told she should not be there. Clara refused to leave. Edmund, who still had the folded paper inside his coat, said nothing but remained beside her. Beatrice entered shaking. The moment she saw Eleanor, she covered her mouth. My lady, Eleanor stood. For 7 years she had imagined hatred as a fire. But looking at Beatrice, thin and terrified, she felt something colder. Tell me what happened. Beatrice wept. At first no words came, then Benedict spoke. His voice was not loud, but it filled the room. You will tell the truth now. Beatrice nodded. I was a housemaid then. Lord Ivor said no harm would come. He said it was only to make her ladyship leave for a little while. He said marriages among great people had arrangements common servants did not understand. Eleanor's face tightened. Benedict stood near the desk, one hand curled against the wood. After dinner your lordship was made ill. Benedict's eyes sharpened. The wine? Yes. My lord, I do not know what was put in it. I swear I do not. You were taken to the smaller inner chamber near your rooms. The door was locked. Benedict looked at her once, then back to Beatrice. My robe, taken from the dressing room. My ring, Beatrice sobbed, removed while you were insensible the night. Lord Ivor said it would be returned before morning. Clara's hand found Edmund's. He held it. And the man behind the screen? Benedict asked. Beatrice whispered. Thomas Norwood. He had a similar height, not the face. But her ladyship would not see the face behind the screen. He was told what to say. Eleanor's eyes closed. The room seemed to tilt beneath her. Thomas, not Benedict. A servant in a stolen robe. A voice in candlelight. A lie sharp enough to cut 7 years from her life. Was Lady Emmeline there? Beatrice could not meet her eyes. Yes, my lady. The silence that followed was terrible. Benedict's face hardened into something almost unrecognizable. She knew it was staged. I do not think she knew about the child. But she knew your ladyship was meant to see enough to leave. Eleanor sat down slowly. Louisa moved to her side. Benedict looked as though he might tear the room apart with his bare hands and yet remained perfectly still. That stillness frightened even Frederick. Beatrice continued, words rushing now. Afterward Lord Ivor paid me and told me to leave. When talk spread that Lady Ashbourne had gone with Lord Montclair, I knew it was false, but I had taken the money. Then came the notice of her death abroad. I thought if she was dead, speaking would change nothing. It would have changed everything. Beatrice flinched as if struck. Edmund stepped forward then. His face was pale but determined. There is more. All eyes turned to him. Eleanor frowned. Edmund, he took the folded paper from his coat. I found this in the small writing room, among Harrington correspondence. Benedict crossed the room and took it. He read. His expression changed. Then he passed it to Eleanor. Her hands trembled as she held it. The false death notice, altered, planned, with an imitation Ashbourne seal. Eleanor stared at the page until the ink blurred. They manufactured my death. Her voice was barely more than breath. Clara spoke from beside Edmund. I heard Lord Ivor say the screen, the robe, and the ring. He threatened Beatrice. Benedict looked at his daughter. Fury, pride, and terror crossed his face all at once. You followed Ivor Harrington? Clara lifted her chin. That is not an answer. It is the answer you are receiving. For one astonishing moment, Frederick looked at the ceiling to hide a smile. Eleanor did not smile. She reached for Clara and pulled her close. You could have been hurt. Clara's defiance faltered beneath her mother's fear. I wanted to help. Eleanor held her tighter. I know. Benedict watched them, mother and daughter, fear and love. Years of protection turned into a child brave enough to hunt the truth herself. He looked at Edmund. And you, Edmund, stood straighter. You searched Harrington correspondence? Edmund hesitated. Yes, my lord. Benedict's mouth tightened. A father should scold him. A viscount should praise his intelligence. A man who had missed 7 years did not yet know how to do either without. At last he said, you were brave. Edmund's eyes lowered and foolish. Edmund looked up. Benedict's voice softened. Something in Edmund's expression eased only slightly. But Benedict saw it. Eleanor saw Benedict see it, and the ache in her chest became almost unbearable. For the first time, she and Benedict were not standing on opposite sides of the wound. They were looking at the same blade, the same hand, the same lie. Later, after Beatrice was safely hidden under Louisa's protection and the children had been sent unwillingly to bed, Eleanor and Benedict remained in the study. Frederick stood near the door. Louisa sat with folded hands, her face pale but resolute. The forged paper lay on the desk. Beside it sat a written account of Beatrice's confession. Evidence, not enough yet for every court, perhaps, but enough for society. And society was the weapon Ivor had used first. Benedict looked at Eleanor. I believed you left me for Frederick. Eleanor's eyes filled. I believed you chose Emmeline because I could not give you a child. Neither spoke for a moment. The tragedy was too clean now, too cruel. They had not simply misunderstood. They had been placed on opposite sides of a locked door and told the other had walked away. Frederick broke the silence. Ivor will move quickly once he suspects Beatrice has spoken. Benedict nodded. He already suspects. Louisa's voice was tight. Then we leave London tonight. No, Benedict said. Eleanor looked at him. His face had become calm, terribly calm. That is what he expects. That is what he has always relied upon. Eleanor running because fear gave her no other road. Servants hiding because poverty made silence safer. Frederick defending himself against rumors no one cared to correct. Me accepting grief because the dead cannot argue. His eyes moved to the forged death notice. No more. Eleanor's voice was quiet. What will you do? Benedict looked toward the covered portrait above the mantel, the portrait hidden beneath black silk, then back to her. The truth must be revealed publicly. Louisa stiffened. Benedict. Not in whispers, he said. Frederick understood first. At the engagement dinner, Eleanor's breath caught. That dinner was to be held the following evening. The final grand event before Benedict's engagement to Emmeline became fully cemented in the eyes of society. Every important family would attend. Every mouth that had once repeated Eleanor's disgrace. Every eye that had accepted her death because it made the scandal easier to finish. Benedict's gaze did not waver. Yes, Eleanor stood slowly. You mean to expose them before everyone? I mean to restore before everyone what was stolen before everyone. A faint tremor passed through her. And Emmeline? His jaw tightened. She will answer for what she did. The name lay between them. Emmeline Harrington, the woman who had wanted Eleanor gone. The woman who had stood beside a staged betrayal and allowed a wife to break. The woman now waiting to become Viscountess Ashbourne. But elsewhere in the house, Ivor Harrington had already begun to feel the ground shifting beneath him. He stood in his sister's chamber while Emmeline sat before her looking-glass, her face pale beneath the careful arrangement of her golden hair. You must go through with the dinner, Ivor said. Emmeline's hands trembled in her lap. Benedict has changed. Benedict's been shocked. That is all. He looks at her as if she stopped, as if she came back from the dead, Ivor snapped. She did. And unless you wish to lose everything, you will remember why we began this. Emmeline turned toward him. I never knew she carried children. No one knew. You said Benedict would be angry, then free. And he was broken. Eva stepped closer. So were we. Do you think creditors accept sentiment? Do you think father's debts vanished because you developed a conscience? If Ashbourne claims those children, if he restores Eleanor, if he ends this engagement without settlement or alliance, the Harrington name is finished. Emmeline looked at herself in the mirror. For the first time, the beautiful face looking back seemed less triumphant than trapped. I wanted him to love me, she whispered. Ivor's voice hardened. Then behave tomorrow as though he still might. Outside her chamber, the house was quiet. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before thunder. And in the nursery wing, Edmund lay awake, staring into darkness while Clara whispered from the next bed, Do you think he will be our father now? Edmund did not answer immediately. He thought of Benedict's face when he had said, You were brave. He thought of the map, the careful handwriting, the way his mother had looked both frightened and relieved when the truth began to rise. I think, Edmund said softly, he has always been head on the pillow. That is not the same thing. No, Edmund whispered. Then, after a moment, But perhaps tomorrow he will begin. Clara said nothing. Yet beneath the blanket, her hand remained wrapped around the green book Benedict had given her. By morning, Ashbourne Hall would dress itself for celebration. Silver would shine, candles would burn, Emmeline Harrington would prepare to smile before the ton. Lord Iver would prepare to secure a fortune with one last performance. Benedict Ashbourne would to turn an engagement dinner into a reckoning, not privately, not mercifully, before the same society that had buried Eleanor, before the same world that had pitied him. Before the children who deserved more than silence, the dead woman had returned, the stolen heirs had been seen, and now, at last, the lie that had ruled 7 years was about to be named. Ashbourne Hall glittered as though it had no memory. Silver candelabra lined the long dining table, their flames trembling above polished plates and crystal glasses. Garlands of white roses and ivy had been wound along the mantel and over the doorways, arranged to honor an engagement that would never survive the night. Footmen moved in quiet formation. Silk gowns whispered over marble floors. Gentlemen spoke in low voices beneath portraits of Ashbourne ancestors who had seen wars, marriages, betrayals, and funerals, but perhaps never this. Every important family in London seemed to have accepted the invitation. Wycliffe, Blackwood, Ravenshaw, Pembroke, Fairborn, Stirling, Westcliff, Beaumont, Granville, Radcliffe, Haverford, Norwood, Langford. They came expecting celebration. They came expecting the final public polishing of a match between Viscount Benedict Ashbourne and Lady Emmeline Harrington. They came expecting music, smiles, and the quiet satisfaction of watching scandal repair itself into respectability. Instead, they entered a house that had dressed itself for a reckoning. No one knew it at first. That was the power of Ashbourne Hall. It had been built to hide storms behind symmetry. The candles burned steadily, the servants bowed correctly, the musicians played from the gallery. The dining room doors stood open, revealing a table laid for honor. Yet beneath the brightness something waited. Attention moved through the guests long before anyone named it. It passed from fan to fan, from gloved hand to jeweled wrist, from one cautious glance to another. Everyone had heard by now that Lady Eleanor Ashbourne was alive. Everyone had heard that she had returned with children. Everyone had heard that the boy had Lord Ashbourne's eyes, and the girl had the old dowager's chin. But hearing scandal in a drawing room was one thing, seeing it breathe was another. When Eleanor entered, the room changed. She did not come in through a side door. She did not hide behind Louisa. She did not lower her face as though returning alive was something for which she must apologize. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne walked through the main doors in a gown of deep midnight blue, the color severe enough for dignity and rich enough for defiance. Her dark hair was pinned smoothly at the nape of her neck, with only a pair of pearl pins getting candled. Her gloves were white, her face was calm. At her right stood Edmund, dark-eyed, quiet, dressed in a formal coat that made him look older than 7 and younger than the burden placed upon him. His small hand hovered near his mother's skirt, not clinging but close enough to remind the room that childhood still lived beneath his careful composure. At her left stood Clara. Clara had insisted upon wearing the rose sash again. Louisa had tried to suggest something softer. Clara had refused. "I am not going to look harmless," she had said. She did not. She looked small, fierce, and unmistakably prepared to dislike anyone who earned it. Behind them came Lady Louisa Hartwell and Lord Frederick Montclair. That detail alone set the room whispering. Frederick's name had once been tied to Eleanor's disappearance with the Cruel Satisfaction Society. Reserved for beautiful lies, his presence tonight was both shield and challenge. At the far end of the room, Benedict rose. He had been seated near Emmeline, as the evening's arrangement required, but the moment Eleanor entered, he stood. Not quickly, not dramatically. With grave, unmistakable purpose. Every whisper noticed, Emmeline noticed most of all. She sat in pale gold silk, lovely as ever, her hair arranged in soft curls beneath a delicate comb. From a distance, she looked like a bride awaiting admiration. Close up, she looked like a woman who had not slept. Her hands were folded in her lap, too tightly. Her brother, Lord Iver Harrington, stood near the mantel, one elbow resting casually against it. His smile composed, his eyes constantly measuring doors, faces, servants, exits. He had the look of a man who believed danger could still be negotiated if caught early enough. Benedict's gaze moved from Eleanor to the children. For one brief moment, formality vanished from his face. There they were, his son, his daughter, not shadows, not accusations, not proof only. Children. Edmund looked at him with that quiet hunger he tried to hide. Clara looked at him as if reminding him that one wrong move would be remembered forever. Edmund gave the smallest headed bow in return. Clara did not yet. The guests settled into a nervous arrangement around the room. Some had been expecting supper immediately, others sensed by instinct that no food would be served until something far less digestible had been placed before them. Benedict moved to the head of the room. The music faded. 100 eyes turned toward him. Emmeline's lips parted. "My lord," she said softly, warning hidden beneath sweetness. Benedict did not look at her. "Before this house celebrates any engagement," he said, his voice calm enough to carry without effort, "truth must be restored to Ashbourne Hall." Ivor straightened slightly. A few guests exchanged glances. Benedict continued, "For 7 years, many of you believed my wife dead." A murmur stood motionless. My wife, Benedict repeated, and the second time he said it, the word struck the gathering more firmly. Emmeline lowered her eyes. Ivor stepped forward. Lord Ashbourne, he said smoothly, surely this is a matter best handled in private. Lady Eleanor's return is shocking, of course, and emotions. Private lies destroyed public honour, Benedict said. Ivor stopped. So public truth will answer them. The room inhaled. Frederick Montclair stepped forward next. He did not enjoy the centre of attention, but he accepted it as a duty. For years, Frederick said, my name was used to explain Lady Eleanor's disappearance. It was implied that she fled with me. That implication was false. Whispers erupted. Frederick's voice remained steady. I did not run away with Lady Eleanor. I did not persuade her to leave her husband. I did not father her children. I assisted Lady Louisa Hartwell only after Eleanor had fled Ashbourne Hall, frightened, alone, and carrying children whose existence Lord Ashbourne did not know. One woman gasped out loud. Benedict's hand tightened at his side. Eleanor looked down at Edmund and Clara. Edmund's face had gone very pale. Clara's eyes burned. Louisa came forward with a folded document. This, she said, holding it up, is a draft of the notice that declared my sister dead abroad. It bears an imitation of the Ashbourne seal and was found among Harrington correspondence. The name Harrington struck the room like a stone into glass. Every eye turned toward Ivor. He laughed once, a controlled, offended laugh. Surely you do not intend to accuse my family because some child found a paper in a room where half the household might have left it. Benedict looked toward Edmund. The boy stepped forward. Eleanor reached for him instinctively, then stopped. This was his truth, too. Edmund walked to the table with the folded paper in his hand. He placed it beside the silver centerpiece. His voice was quiet. But in that room, quietness carried. The seal-is gentleman near the table frowned. What did he say? Edmund swallowed, then spoke more clearly. The Ashbourne crest has a left-facing stag above the shield. This one faces right. Someone copied it from memory or from a poor impression. Silence. Benedict looked at his son. For one moment, pride broke through the grief. Not loud, but unmistakable. Ivor's face tightened. Children should not be encouraged to make accusations in matters beyond their understanding. Clara stepped forward. I understand perfectly. Eleanor closed her eyes for 1 sec. Of course she did. Clara lifted her chin. I heard you threaten Beatrice Penrose. You said if she spoke of the screen, the robe, and the ring, she would lose everything. The room erupted. The screen, what robe, what ring? Who is Beatrice Penrose? Ivor's calm finally cracked. You wicked moved, only 1 step, but the room felt it. Ivor stopped speaking. Benedict's voice was low. Choose your next word carefully. Ivor's jaw tightened. The door near the servants' passage opened. Beatrice Penrose entered. She wore plain dark clothing and looked as though each step cost her strength. Frederick walked beside her, not touching her, but near enough to steady her if she faltered. The room stared, recognized her. Most did not. Benedict spoke. Penrose served in this house 7 years ago. She has come tonight to confess what happened the night Lady Eleanor vanished. Beatrice stood before the gathering and began to tremble. For a moment, Eleanor thought the woman would collapse. Then Beatrice looked at her. My lady, she whispered, forgive me. Eleanor did not answer, not because she was cruel, because forgiveness was too sacred to be forced before an audience. Beatrice turned to the room. Lord Ashbourne was made ill after dinner. Something was put in his wine. He was taken to an inner chamber and locked inside. His dressing robe was taken. His signet ring was taken from his hand while he lay insensible. Sound moved through the crowd. Benedict's face remained carved in stone. But Eleanor saw the muscle tighten in his jaw. Beatrice continued. A servant named Thomas Norwood stood behind a painted screen in Lord Ashbourne's chamber. Lady Emmeline Harrington was present. Lady Eleanor came to the door and saw enough to believe her husband had chosen another woman. Emmeline's face crumpled slightly, then hardened again with the last remnants of pride. Beatrice's voice broke. The servant was told to speak the words Lord Ivor had given him. Benedict's eyes went to Ivor. Beatrice looked down. He said, a viscount cannot build his future on a barren wife. A terrible silence followed. It was not shock alone, it was recognition. Every woman in that room understood the cruelty of the sentence. Every man who cared for legacy understood its weapon. Every guest who had ever whispered about Eleanor's empty nursery felt the shame of their own participation settle coldly upon them. Eleanor stood very still, but inside her something long frozen began to burn, not with rage only, with release. For 7 years, that sentence had lived inside her as Benedict's voice. Now it lay before the world as what it had always been, a weapon placed in another man's mouth. Benedict turned slowly toward Emmeline. For the first time that evening, he spoke directly to her. Did you know my wife was carrying my children when you helped drive her from this house? Emmeline looked as if he had struck the air from her. No. Then softer. No, I did not know that. Benedict's eyes did not soften, but you knew the scene was staged. Emmeline's lips trembled. Ivor hissed. But Emmeline had reached the end of silence. 7 years of wanting Benedict Ashbourne's love had brought her to this room beneath these candles, before the woman she had tried to erase and the children she had never imagined. She looked at Eleanor, and for once the sweetness was gone. Only a frightened, ashamed woman remained. Yes, Emmeline stirred her steps toward her. Emmeline, she turned on him. No. The single word stopped him more effectively than any shout. No, she repeated, louder now. You said she would leave for a short while. You said Benedict would be angry at first, but free. You said once the marriage was broken he would see reason. You said our family would be saved. Ivor's face darkened. I was foolish, Emmeline said, and now tears shone in her eyes, but not because I speak now. I was foolish because I believed love could be obtained by removing the woman who already had it. Eleanor's breath caught. Benedict's gaze flickered once. Emmeline continued, voice shaking. I wanted him. I wanted Ashbourne. I wanted to be the woman everyone said he needed. I hated Lady Eleanor because she had his name and his heart, and because I believed patience would make him turn to me if she were gone long enough. Her voice cracked, but I did not know she carried children. I did not know Lord Ivor would forge her death. I did not know how far he would go. Ivor's control broke. You ungrateful creature. Do you know what debts I carried to keep this family standing? Do you know what father left us? Ruin. Letters from creditors. Men at the door. You speak of conscience because you have never understood the cost of survival. Benedict's voice cut through the room. So you chose theft. Ivor turned to him. I speak as a man whose wife was stolen. Ivor's nostrils flared. Your wife left. My wife was driven out by a lie. The room recoiled. Eleanor went pale. Benedict moved so quickly that several gentlemen stepped forward, fearing violence. But he did not touch Ivor. He stopped before him, close enough that Ivor had to look up. Yes, Benedict said quietly. She believed it because this society had already taught her she was failing me. The words struck the room as sharply as any accusation. Benedict turned, addressing them all now. She believed it because empty nurseries become public property in houses like this, because women are judged by heirs before hearts, because every whisper about duty prepared the ground for that lie. No one spoke, no one dared. Then Benedict looked back at Ivor. Louisa stepped forward. The forged death notice, the paid servants, the threats against Beatrice Penrose. All of it will be given to the proper authorities. Ivor laughed bitterly. You think society will condemn me? Society loves scandal until it is asked to confess it helped, Frederick answered. Then tonight it may learn Benedict turned to the assembly. My engagement to Lady Emmeline Harrington is ended. Emmeline bowed her head. A sound moved through the room. Shock, relief, satisfaction, pity there, Benedict continued. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne is alive. She is my lawful wife. She was wronged in this house, and the wrong was allowed to stand because lies were convenient to those who benefited from them. Eleanor's eyes filled, not because all was healed. It was not. Not because 7 years could be returned. They could not. But because the truth had finally been spoken in the room where her silence had once begun. Benedict turned toward the children. Edmund stood very still beside Clara. Clara's hand was clenched around the ribbon at her waist. Benedict walked to them slowly. The entire room watched. He lowered himself to one knee, not for performance. For them, his voice, when he spoke, was steady but full. Edmund Ashbourne. A tremor eyes through Eleanor. Benedict turned to Clara. Miss Clara Ashbourne. The room erupted into whispers. Ashbourne, not Hartwell, not hidden, not unnamed, restored. Clara looked at him, startled despite herself. Edmund's mouth parted slightly, but no words came. Benedict did not reach for them. He did not embrace them before the room. He had learned at least that much. Instead, he bowed his head. I should have known you from the beginning. Since I did not, I will spend the rest of my life earning the right to be known by you now. Edmund's eyes shone. Clara looked away fiercely. But she did not step back. That for Clara was almost mercy. Ivor Harrington was removed from the room not by force, but by abandonment. No one stood with him, not Emmeline, not the families who had once smiled at his table, not the men who understood too late that debt had made him dangerous. He left with his face hard and his future crumbling behind him. Emmeline remained only long enough to look at Eleanor. For a moment, both women were silent. Then Emmeline curtsied. Not prettily, not gracefully. Deeply. I cannot ask forgiveness. Eleanor's voice was quiet. No, Emmeline's face tightened, but you may one day learn remorse properly. Emmeline bowed her head and left. The dinner did not continue. Of course it did not. No one could sit down afterward and speak of soup. Guests departed in clusters, carrying the truth out into London like a flame passed from candle to candle. By morning, every drawing-room would know. By noon, every liar would be revising what they had always claimed to suspect. By evening, society would begin the slow work of pretending it had never been fooled. But Ashbourne Hall knew, Benedict knew, and the children knew. Later, when the last carriage rolled away and the house fell into a silence different from all the silences before it, Eleanor stepped into the garden. The night was cool, the sky clear. Beyond the terrace, the lawns lay silver beneath moonlight. The roses, pale and bruised by evening damp, bowed gently in the breeze. Ashbourne Hall rose behind her, lit in scattered windows, no longer a tomb, not yet a home. She heard Bennet before she saw him. He stopped several paces away. For a moment neither spoke. Then he said, "I will not ask you to pretend tonight has repaired everything." Eleanor looked out across the garden. "No, truth has returned," he said. "Time has not." Her eyes closed. Those words touched the deepest part of the wound. Time had not returned. Not the first cries. Not the childhood questions. Not the years Edmund had watched other fathers. Not the years Clara had sharpened herself against an absence. Not the young wife Eleanor had been before fear taught her to vanish. "I cannot ask you to forget 7 years. No," she whispered. "And I cannot forgive myself for not seeing the trap before it closed." Eleanor turned to him then. Moonlight softened the severity of his face, but did not hide the grief there. "I kept them from you," she said. His expression tightened. "I know why. That does not erase what I did." No. The honesty hurt, but it also steadied her. He stepped closer, leaving enough space for her to refuse him. "I failed to protect you from a world in which that lie was easy to believe." Eleanor's eyes filled. "I believed it because I was afraid. You believed it because they made certain you would, and because some part of me already feared I was not enough." Benedict's face changed. "You were always enough." The words were quiet, too late, but true. Eleanor looked away, breathing through the ache. For a while, the garden held them in silence. Then Benedict extended his hand. He did not seize hers, he did not command, he offered. Eleanor looked at it for a long moment. The hand of the man she had loved, the man she had mourned while still alive. The man whose children she had hidden. The man who had lost as much as she had, though differently. At last she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers gently, not as a claim, as a beginning. The terrace door opened behind them. Clara's voice carried into the night. "Are we interrupting?" Eleanor almost laughed, almost cried, perhaps both. Edmund and Clara stood at the garden entrance in their evening clothes, both supposed to be in bed, and neither showing the slightest remorse. Louisa peered behind them, looking tired and helpless. "They insisted," she said. Clara lifted her chin. "We were not asleep." "That was evident," Louisa replied. Edmund looked from his mother to Benedict. His gaze dropped to their joined hands, then lifted again. "Must we leave?" The question was small, almost hidden, but it broke Eleanor's heart gently. Benedict knelt before him. "No, not unless your mother wishes it." Edmund looked at Eleanor. She walked to him and touched his cheek. "We will decide together, together." The words settled over them like a fragile blessing. Clara stepped toward Benedict. Her face remained stern. "You may begin tomorrow." "Begin what? Being our father?" His throat moved. "I would be honored, but if you make Mama cry again," Clara said, eyes flashing, "I shall not forgive you." Benedict looked at her with solemnity equal to any oath sworn before Parliament. "Then I shall spend tomorrow and every day after trying not to deserve your anger." Then slowly she offered her hand. Not a hug, not forgiveness, not yet. But her hand. Benedict took it as if she had given him a crown. Edmund stepped closer. After a moment he placed his own hand on Benedict's shoulder. Eleanor turned her face away because the sight was too much. Not happiness, not exactly. Something more painful and more precious. Hope with scars. In the weeks that followed, Ashbourne Hall did not transform overnight. Old houses do not heal quickly. Neither do old wounds, but changes began. The black silk was removed from Eleanor's portrait. The nursery wing was opened not as a monument to what had been lost, but as a room children might actually use. Dust sheets were taken off the little shelves. The carved cradle remained. Too small for Edmund and Clara now, but Eleanor did not have it removed. Some grief deserved to be witnessed before it was released. Edmund began walking with Benedict across the estate in the mornings. At first he brought questions folded carefully inside silence. Then he brought more. About tenants' horses, about Parliament, about whether Benedict had truly stolen apples and how many. Benedict answered everyone. Clara watched from a distance at first, then from a shorter distance. Then one afternoon, she appeared beside them with the green book beneath her arm and informed Benedict that the chapter on brave women had errors. Benedict asked her to explain. She did, for nearly half an hour. He listened as though receiving counsel from the crown. Eleanor saw it from the garden path and pressed a hand to her heart, not because all was well, but because something living had begun to grow where silence had once stood. As for Eleanor and Benedict, they did not rush toward the easy ending society preferred. They walked carefully. Some evenings they spoke in the library. Some mornings they sat with tea, lemon restored to the tray without comment. Sometimes they remembered too much and had to fall silent. Sometimes their hands met and stayed. Forgiveness, Eleanor learned, was not a door flung open. It was a candle carried through a dark house. One truth at a time, one morning at a time, Ashbourne Hall, once silent, woke slowly. A father walked beside a son who was learning not to feel guilty for wanting him. A daughter watched that father carefully. Still ready to defend her mother, but no longer certain he was her enemy. Her mother stood in the doorway, no longer hidden, and the Viscount, who had seemed to move on, learned that moving on was not the same as healing. The world had told Benedict Ashbourne that his wife was gone, so he covered her portrait, he buried his hope, he agreed to marry another. But when Lady Eleanor returned with his twin heirs at her side, every lie that had buried their love began to rise. And for the first time in 7 years, Ashbourne Hall did not sound empty. It sounded like footsteps in the nursery corridor, like children arguing over breakfast, like a woman laughing softly before she remembered not to be afraid of joy, like a man pausing outside a doorway, humbled by the life he had almost lost forever, not restored perfectly, not healed without scars, but alive. And sometimes, after 7 years of silence, alive was miracle enough.